Yes.
The lead Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1306 of the War News stream. And today we gotten some very big news that U.S. officials have deployed the nuclear command plane to Germany to spice things up a little bit. Also, Venezuela panics as U.S. special forces arrive on a ship near their coast. And also, Germany's intercepted the IL-20 Coot near their airspace. And once again, it looks like they've moved on from Alaska and they moved over to Germany this time. The Coot's harassing everybody, but it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of news from around the world. Hopefully, I do not have a stammer. That is the King's Speech, everyone, and you'll have to pay for viewing on that. But nevertheless, we will be making sure to cover the past 24 hours of news from around the world, as we have been able to hear of significant news once again in every single corner of the planet. We have been able to hear that a United States Air Force, or I believe it's the United States Navy, E-6B Mercury has arrived today at Ramstein Air Base within the Federal Republic of Germany, which is responsible for the direct command and operations of all ballistic missile submarines and the intercontinental ballistic missiles that they carry on board within the region. This is an exceptionally rare deployment, as we have not seen a deployment of an E-6B Mercury until early 2024, which it was involved in a part of a NATO military exercise that was being conducted inside the Norwegian Sea. This current deployment by this E-6B Mercury is not attached to a military exercise, and this makes it exceptionally rare, and is also showing that the United States is preparing its command and control abilities of its intercontinental ballistic missiles carried on board our ballistic missile carrying submarines that are currently within the area of Europe on patrol at this moment. At the exact same time, we have been able to hear that a SPEC Ops ship has started to near the coast of Venezuela at this moment. The SPEC Ops vessel is responsible for large-scale operations of Special Operations Forces, and are starting to make the situation appear that it's going to be more so a reality that Special Forces raids will most likely happen inside of Venezuela, rather than some sort of a possibility that that could happen in the future. Venezuela, at the same time, is decreeing that they are not involved in the drug trades whatsoever, and are also requesting an open dialogue with the United States of America. Simultaneously, we've also heard that Venezuelan military officials are stating that they are ready for war, and we've also been able to see the preparation of the reservists today on film, which appears to be showing that the statements by Maduro's government may be a stall tactic to help them try and prepare and ready their armed forces as much as possible for the impending conflict that is coming their way. We also saw that the United States Navy's surface fleet, under the command of 2nd Fleet, which is under the direct command of U.S. Southcom, currently took some pictures today just south of the area of the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico, and the Dominican Republic also reported that the United States had conducted a strike on a narco boat near to the waters of the Dominican Republic, but not inside of them. Outside of that, we were also able to hear that the Taliban has openly refused any sort of U.S. demands for them to give back Bagram, and the Taliban has also responded to a threat that the President of the United States made, saying that the U.S. would be more than ready to go back and fight the Taliban for 20 years, and the Taliban responded by saying that they are also more than ready to fight for the next 20 years, making it incredibly clear that any attempt to retake Bagram will most likely return to a situation like the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan from 2001 to 2021. Also, a little side note about the Venezuela situation, China has openly stated that they express solidarity with the nation of Venezuela and are also saying that they understand their plight against the United States of America. If it's not clear that the United States is trying to curb Chinese influence inside of South America at this point, it'd be pretty hard to make the claim. It appears that the Chinese are now getting directly involved. We also heard today that North Korea made it incredibly clear that any U.S. negotiations from this point on will no longer be about nuclear weaponry, as North Korea has made it incredibly clear that they have completely abandoned any remote concept of abandoning their nuclear arsenal, and also any attempt at reunification with South Korea, which is a major shift from prior Kims like Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung, which did state that reunification with South Korea was their main goal, and also Kim Jong-il, at least in his final years alive, and also for most of Kim Jong-un's reign, did float around the very small percentage chance that they would abandon the nuclear arsenals if given the proper kind of concessions from the West. Outside of that, and in the Russian Federation, we also were able to hear that the Russian Federation is continuing to deal with significant fuel shortages throughout the country, while at the same time, the Leningrad Military District Commander Alexander Lapin was removed from his headquarters today and completely removed from military service. Incredibly suspicious. We've also seen that the European Union has intercepted some Russian Coots near to the area of Poland. We actually heard that they were quite easy to intercept, considering that the Coots were using walkers. We also heard at the same time that the United Nations and NATO are going to be preparing to make a response in some form to the Russian airspace incursion that happened around the area of Estonia just several days ago. On top of that, the Ukrainian armed forces have continued to hold the line throughout their country today and have inflicted significant casualties on Russian Federation armed forces throughout most of the fronts, and have also stricken a major sanatorium in the area of Foros, which apparently was used by the Russian top command. This is giving us a general idea that the Russian Federation is still suffering significant losses from the state of Ukraine. And also, one other thing is that the president of the Syrian interim government, al-Shura, as we know him, al-Jalani, arrived inside of the United States today. I'm sure nothing weird and suspicious happened with that as far as a U.S. embassy statement in Syria at the exact same time that he arrived today. But we are going to be getting into all of that news tonight, and then some. But I also have to point out that we have a significant fundraiser running for Nova Ukraine, an amazing nonprofit that has been helping out in Ukraine for years upon years that we've been covering this channel, and Nova Ukraine has been helping out the Ukrainian people in the midst of this war to be able to try and avoid the terrible brutality of war as much as possible. Any support that the Lee Spring Army provides to the fundraiser goes 100% to Nova Ukraine. That's managed by YouTube, and we also would love to see that we hit another fundraiser goal tonight, as we have already been able to raise in just a short 15 minutes $509 out of the
very nice,
$2,500
very nice.
Very nice indeed. Actually, pretty impressive right there. But nevertheless, folks, we are going to be getting y'all into all of the big news that we have for the night, as Hal Rose and Bobby43 both throw in hundreds, starting this thing off strong, at least as far as the news segment of the fundraising is going. But moving us on into the significant and major news that we have been able to see over the course of the past 24 hours, we have been able to hear of the arrival of an incredibly rare and somewhat interesting aircraft inside of Europe, the E-6 E6B Mercury. An unusual sighting occurred today inside the Atlantic as a U.S. Navy E6B Mercury airborne nuclear command post and communications relay going by the call sign WEP-T25 recently departed from Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma. Bound for somewhere in Europe, it ended up being Ramstein Air Base, possibly Ramstein Air Base. It ended up being Ramstein, as we were able to confirm later. These aircraft act as a relay to communication instructions from the President, Defense Secretary, and other members of the National Command Authority to the U.S. Navy's fleet of nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines across the world as part of a mission dubbed Take Charge and Move Out, or TACAMO, which rarely sees them leave the United States. The last time that we saw the deployment of one of these E-6B Mercuries was actually around the time of early 2024, which it was involved in a limited military exercise that NATO was conducting off of the shore of Norway inside the Norwegian Sea. That aircraft was directly explained to be a part of that military exercise when it arrived in the area, and it did participate as a part of the U.S. nuclear deterrence doctrine that exists inside of Europe. However, we have never seen one deployed under these circumstances, at least at the moment, as no public announcements have come out that this E-6B Mercury is to be involved in any kind of a military exercise in the area, and as a matter of fact, appears to be moved into the area in the advent that the United States of America, through the Office of the President or any of his subordinate offices within the executive branch, need to start issuing orders to ballistic missile submarines that are currently inside of the area. This is a fairly rare sort of a thing. I do want to make it clear, though, that the end of the world is not here, and everyone isn't going to be dying tonight. I know some people love to feed off of that kind of a fear, and that's not going to be happening. So, just to kill off the suspense of the story, you're not dying tonight or the next night as a result of this aircraft going to Europe, but it is incredibly rare, and it is quite interesting, at least the fact that it is being deployed under this sort of a circumstance, not directly attached to a military exercise, and once again being sent to Europe, where we already know that there is pretty much a constant nuclear deterrence being projected against the Russian Federation. The arrival of this aircraft allows for direct command and communications with those submarines, meaning that if the Russian Federation was to start conducting a nuclear attack on the West, the President of the United States would be able to convey his orders to the ballistic submarines from these E-6B Mercuries, with the President relaying the message to the Mercuries, and then the Mercuries relaying those messages to the submarines, allowing for the orders to fire, or any orders being issued to those submarines, to be received, at least in military terms, near instantaneously, within less than several minutes. So that generally seems to be the change of the situation that we're seeing, at least for U.S. force posturing in the area, as far as our nuclear deterrence in the form of the ballistic missile submarines. But once again, I want to heavily emphasize to everyone that the world is not going to be ending as a result of this, and we also don't want to make the story out to be like that, considering that this is quite rare, but we have no reason to believe that it's anything extremely dangerous or exceptional. We try and make sure, at least on our channel, to have a great deal of diligence with not freaking out people unnecessarily, and this is something that is quite interesting and a point of intrigue, especially considering that this appears to be a direct part of increased U.S. nuclear deterrence and nuclear response times within the area, but it doesn't correlate directly to anything to suggest that a nuclear war is going to be happening anytime soon. But nevertheless, a lot of people have been talking about the arrival of this pale horse. Also, an interesting thing about it, considering why I called it a pale horse, E-6 Mercuries are pretty much stark white. They have practically no livery or markings on board the aircraft, except for the U.S. Air Force's roundels, which you can see on the fuselage and the wings. So in a sense, this thing is actually a pale horse of death in a way, as it actually would be the one to receive the orders from the President for those ballistic submarines to fire off their nuclear weapons, and then convey those orders directly to the submarines, giving them the orders to fire. So this thing actually is kind of like the one of the horses of the apocalypse of a sort, in a weird sense, at least in the fact that it's all white. And I guess that its final message is death in a sense. But nevertheless, Matthew, what are people thinking about this sort of a deployment of this E-6B Mercury to Ramstein, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so it looks like 67% of the audience said the U.S. is strengthening their nuclear deterrence by deploying this plane, while 20% said the U.S. is making a direct threat toward Russia with that deployment, and 7% said it seems like something else. And I would say it seems like it most likely is some type of fear mongering or some type of threat toward Russia to make them rethink attacking or doing anything to NATO allies, because this is a very rare deployment. We typically do not see the E6 heading over toward Europe. This is extremely rare. So, also, by the way, just to explain a little bit more about this, it's designed to take over in case the Global Ops Center at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska gets destroyed or it's incapable of communicating with our nuclear forces. So, this thing called the Looking Glass is a way for us to communicate, like the enforcer said, with those nuclear submarines and our other nuclear forces around the world. It's part of that whole system. So deploying that to Europe is certainly a big move, and I would say it certainly is a bold statement toward Russia. I don't think it's really more about deterrence. I think it's more about scaring Russia and letting them know that we mean business, at least with this deployment. So, enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that it is a fairly interesting sort of a deployment, and I would say that it's largely an extenuation of our nuclear deterrence within the area and making it incredibly clear that response times would not be interrupted and that the United States of America is continuing to have a nuclear standing and nuclear deterrence effect, at least inside of Europe at the moment, against the Russian Federation. I don't really think that there's a lot more to take out of this, though, just to make it clear to folks, as I saw some people kidding around in the chat saying, so you're saying that we're dying by the end of the work week? Not at all. This is largely just a deterrent element, and one that we see quite rarely. We haven't seen this normally, at least in Europe or really anywhere else, but still, it's deterrence only, and not suggesting that any sort of a nuclear attack is coming or anything else along those lines. And also, one other thing that I do want to note for folks is that these E6B Mercuries rarely ever leave the United States of America. The last time one was seen in Europe was the earlier part of 2024, around March. So really, it's been about a year and 8 months since one has been seen inside of Europe at all, meaning that there's been none of these in Europe for a year and 8 months. And the last time that one arrived, it was directly a part of a NATO military exercise that was conducted inside the Norwegian Sea. Meaning that the last time this thing arrived, it was directly a part of an exercise, most likely to try and keep the crews of these aircraft in lock and step as to what exactly they're doing and how to communicate with U.S. submarines within the area, but it was not a part of a standalone operation like this deployment of the E-6B Mercury is currently. And unfortunately, folks, I don't know the last time that one was deployed as a standalone operation and not a part of a military exercise, but the last time that a Mercury was in Europe at all for any reason was about a year and 8 months ago. But moving on out of that, and
Also, by the way, the last time this happened, it went to Norway the last time, and that was back in June of last year. So that was the last time the E6B has been overseas, according to what I know. But also, by the way, this thing communicates via satellite with our forces. So, what's the point of sending it to Europe outside of it being some type of political statement or some type of deterrence statement, I guess you could say? Because this thing doesn't have to be in Europe to communicate with our submarines. It can be pretty much anywhere around the world as long as it has a satellite connection. So, I think that might tell us something as well.
yeah, I would have to agree, but I generally think that's more so a deterrence element or a deterrence effort instead of anything that's going to be resulting in any sort of a direct action. I just want to continue to emphasize that to folks because people get incredibly scared, and rightfully so, whenever they hear of anything involving nuclear deterrence happening. Like, for example, we could take I don't know, a B-2 Spirit or a Minuteman III and fire it as a test, and a lot of people are thinking that it's getting close to the end of the world. And there are a lot of people out there who peddle that sort of news where anything that happens with nuclear deterrence, it's practically the equivalent of straight-up death instantaneously for everyone. And that's not the case with this. This is clearly some sort of posturing or a deterrent effect as far as our nuclear arsenal is concerned, and that's the messaging that's intended. But outside of that, I don't really think there's more to take out of this, like, for example, any direct nuclear action by Russia against us or us against Russia, at least for the foreseeable future. Outside of that, however, we have been able to see that there's been some larger direct action that is going on down in the area of Venezuela, and particularly the Caribbean. We have a load of news that's come out of the Caribbean today, and all of it is quite interesting. First off, we got to see the entire surface fleet that's under U.S. Second Fleet's command right here, which is very interesting. We can actually see, at least center ground of the screen, the USS San Antonio or the USS Fort Lauderdale, which you can see right there. That's that big support ship in the middle of the fleet. Surrounding that, we have a smaller tender up front, an unidentified vessel over there. I unfortunately cannot tell y'all what kind. Actually, that would be a Freedom class littoral combat ship. I've forgotten how damn big those things were. There's also an Arleigh Burke right there. There's another Arleigh Burke down here. I don't know what that one is. There's another. Well, actually, that's the Freedom class littoral. What the hell is that? Well, let's see if we can get a better picture. What is this thing?
I don't know what that is, to be honest with you. I couldn't tell you. I'm also not an expert in naval ships, so I couldn't tell you.
I would have to be honest with y'all, folks. This one's running me for a loop because from a distance, it looked like it might have been a littoral combat ship. But the one littoral combat ship we have in the area is back there at the top left of the formation. This one down here near the bottom right is a totally different class of ship. It's not a part of the amphibious ready group, but I've also not really seen it listed anywhere else on any public statements or maps that have been made by folks like Ian Ellis on Twitter being present in the area. There are a couple of other Arleigh Burkes, one here, one here. There appears to be another one back there, and possibly another one right here. But unfortunately, I cannot tell you what exact class of vessel this is. And I see some people saying it's the ice cream ship, and it might be. You never know. With the United States, it's always possible. But beyond that, this was the entirety of the surface fleet that we have under the command of U.S. Second Fleet currently, which actually posed for a photo op today within the Eastern Caribbean, just off of the coast of Venezuela. Clearly a force posturing move, if any. On top of that, the Dominican Republic also stated that apparently some U.S. forces in the area conducted a strike on a narco boat near its coast, but it wasn't in territorial waters. The explosion was just heard off in the distance, way out at sea, and that was the end of the story. We didn't get any official news on that strike or what was involved with that, or at least a public statement on it, but that may be the fourth strike on a narco boat that has happened, and interestingly enough, that one was well away from Venezuelan territorial waters, and pretty much inside of near Dominican Republic territorial waters on the shores of the Dominican Republic, at least according to their governmental statements made recently. Also, a special ship has started to arrive in the area, and this one's incredibly interesting. This is a U.S. SPEC Ops mothership that's now operating inside of the Caribbean. This one was seen somewhere near to the area of Puerto Rico, somewhere off of the coast. We don't know exactly where, at least from what I could see on this post. It didn't give the direct coordinates, but you can see that it's 91 kilometers to St. Kitts. So this is putting this somewhere up, at least around here, inside of the eastern Caribbean, and somewhere within its most northeastern corner. At least from what we know. Nevertheless, this thing does appear to be getting a little bit closer to Venezuela, and from what we understand, and I'll have to give you all of the information that was provided over here on the side, this appears to be some sort of a special operations vessel of the United States Navy, as there were other satellite pictures taken of this very same vessel at Bahrain in June of 2024, and also once again at Bahrain in April of 2025. According to the information we have, analysis of the Sentinel-2 imagery from September 20th of 2025 shows a vessel with a highly unique fore and aft superstructure almost identical to the MV Ocean Trader, a U.S. Special Operations Command vessel operating southwest of St. Kitts. The MV Ocean Trader is a fascinating asset of the United States Navy. Converted from a commercial railroad ship, she serves as a clandestine forward operating base capable of launching small craft and supporting special forces teams while blending in with commercial shipping traffic. This sighting, if confirmed, represents a significant move. The last time it was spotted by MT Anderson, it was actually inside the Middle East near to Bahrain on the 23rd of May of 2025. The presence here could point to a new chapter of operations in the region. And this is something that is quite interesting, as this largely appears to be, from everything that we can tell, a Special Operations Forces mothership of the United States Armed Forces that is now sailing through the area of the northeastern Caribbean and appears to be trailing around, at least from what we could see here, if the satellite imagery is oriented with the east being on the right side and the west being on the left side. This thing actually appears to be traveling further towards to the southeast of the Caribbean, somewhere near to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, possibly. This will put it incredibly close to the shore of Venezuela, and this also would mean that U.S. Special Forces raids inside of Venezuela may be becoming a much higher likelihood at the moment, as this vessel may be able to covertly drop off Special Forces infiltration teams into the country and allow for them to conduct autonomous operations throughout Venezuela, either attacking key government offices, attempting to stir up rebellious sentiments within the population, and also trying to pre-prepare and set up positions or attacks to help support U.S. landings that could be conducted in Venezuela, or to be able to allow for special forces to gather intelligence and reconnaissance on key sites inside of Venezuela for future U.S. airstrikes to be coordinated and targeted at a far more successful efficiency inside of the country if those airstrikes or ground operations were to be conducted. All of this is quite interesting, and a lot of people have been talking about whether or not that special operations vessel passing through the area would suggest that special operations will be conducted here soon against Venezuela in the form of special forces raids or other forms of special forces infiltrations into the country. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that? And what are you thinking about that as well?
All right. So now that we've seen this thing right off the coast of Venezuela, and once again, this is a really cool vessel, by the way. It is a special operations vessel, and this thing actually has sides that actually open, and there's like little mini boat, little speed boats that come out the side of it. So it's truly like a James Bond style vessel, and it's designed to look like a normal civilian vessel, or at least a cargo vessel of some sort. So that way, people really don't suspect it for what it is, but it's kind of like an open secret. Everybody knows this thing is a spy ship, and there it is right there, actually out at sea. When it was first built, we got some initial photos of it actually in the shipyard, and it was much cleaner looking then, but it's looking a little bit used right there. I think it's definitely got some mileage on it in that picture. But they launched these craft called CCA. It's the Combat Something Craft. I can't remember the exact name of it, but very advanced speedboats that are somewhat stealthy that can quickly infiltrate an area and exfiltrate the special operators from the area. So very cool type of craft right here. But are raids coming to Venezuela? That is the question. And 50% said yes, spec ops raids are very likely next, while 22% said they strike first, meaning the United States strikes Venezuela, and then the raids occur, and 15% said no, special operation raids are not viable. So on this one, I'll say this. I think, honestly, the U.S. has to strike first in Venezuela, and then raids might occur. Because sending in forces just for a raid, the Venezuelans are going to be expecting that. So unless they're thrown off kilter by some type of precision strike first, then I think the raid is likely going to be a disaster. So that seems like common sense to me. So I think the strikes are naturally going to take place. I think that kind of indicates it's coming. Because obviously you don't send special forces close to the coast like that unless you're planning on deploying them. So we have heard rumors of it. I think that's coming next. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that Spec Ops raids are actually somewhat likely, and I would say that they could happen without the presence of any U.S. strikes to be able to gather reconnaissance and intelligence on hard-to-see locations, or possibly to be able to personally surveil the sorts of movements of government officials, including Maduro, to be able to try and ascertain what strikes would be needed to be conducted, what type of ordnance might be used, and to also possibly laser designate those targets to ensure that there is a precise strike directly on the mark if necessary. Those sorts of things could be conducted, at least by Special Forces raids at the moment, and I'd also say that, at least as far as Special Forces raids that we would see right now, it's highly likely, at least in my opinion, that they would not be dropped off, say, on a rib or a combat vessel like you were talking about earlier, you know, in full uniforms with full kits, in normal clothes. They might be dropped off in normal uniforms. They might be dropped off in civilian clothes, which is technically a war crime, but it is something that might be done by special forces. They might be dropped off in civilian clothes on the shore, and they might actually pick the members of this team to be proficient or fluent in Spanish, or they may have ensured that they were proficient or fluent in Spanish, so that way they could drop them off, and they might be able to blend in with the local population while conducting reconnaissance operations. It's also likely that they may be dropped off with full kit and also their standard uniforms on, and then just infiltrate the country and pretty much evade any Venezuelan patrols or any Venezuelan searches for infiltration teams, while also trying to carry out their mission and possibly set up listening posts like they attempted to do in North Korea, or a wide variety of other operations. Special forces are extremely versatile in what they can do, and not every single thing that Special Forces does involves taking out some sort of a high priority target. There are a million things that Special Forces end up getting up to, and that's why you usually don't hear about most of it. As a matter of fact, you'll probably never hear about anything that Special Forces does beyond taking out high priority targets, because when a high priority target gets killed, there's really no other way to say it rather than the Special Forces did it to them. But there are loads that they do. They can set up listening posts, they can surveil government officials, military bases, and as a matter of fact, One thing that's great is that they can whip out a laser designator, and this is one of the more important parts of what they might be doing if U.S. airstrikes are coming. They could whip out a laser designator, go straight to these bases, and go, there's a target, put a laser designator on it, and an F-35 can drop a JDAM from, say, 30,000 feet up, 20 miles away, and that JDAM will pretty much guide itself right down onto that laser marker right in the middle of that compound and strike dead onto that target. No GPS jamming can really interfere with that, because at that point, the JDAM is being guided in by the laser designator that's on target. So there is a likelihood that that could also be what they're doing. I mean, quite honestly, folks, there's literally a million things that special forces could do if they make it into the country. But these are just some of the ideas that I would have as to what they could possibly be doing. And it might also just be an attempt to scare the Venezuelans into thinking there might be special forces operators wandering around through Venezuela, in the jungles, in the cities, really anywhere. And that could end up panicking the Venezuelan government, because now anywhere could be possibly unsafe.
Maybe so, but me personally, I think that the fact that this ship has showed up, and also we've heard some rumors floating around the background that there was going to be some type of special forces raid happening in Venezuela. I think that this is a likely, it's probably already planned out, and they're probably simply putting the assets into place to make the plan happen. Because for this thing to show up, and also we've obviously got a huge amount of naval assets, Air Force assets, etc. I think this is part of a predetermined plan that's being put into motion right now. So me personally, I am still banking on we're probably going to see precision strikes first, and then we'll probably see a strategic insertion of the special operator forces, who will then go in and secure different places that are strategic inside the capital of Venezuela. That's what I'm guessing is going to happen, but of course it could vary. And once again, they probably won't send in the special forces operators blatantly like the enforcer was mentioning. It'll probably be more covert. They'll probably either send them in underwater or something of that nature first, so that way they aren't detected going in. Because obviously you don't want to send in guys with America written on their chest and then have them running through the streets of Venezuela. That's not going to go too well. So covert is the name of the game. So they'll probably be a lot more covert about it. But honestly, to me, it looks like they're planning something big. I would say this ship showing up right here indicates that they've got a pretty big plan in motion.
I would have to agree. Also, one other thing, this is something that would be inspired by Afghanistan, but possible, is back in Afghanistan, if y'all didn't know, during our initial invasion, we would drop off the special forces and the CIA by helicopter throughout Afghanistan, and they would literally, like the CIA operatives at least, would literally just walk out of the helicopter wearing a suit with a suitcase of money and just start buying off local support. So that way they literally had pretty much everyone on board with the U.S. coming into an area, because they had quite literally paid everyone off to be on board with America showing up. Something like that might be done inside of Venezuela. For example, these special forces could be dropped off with just the general mission of dropping off these suitcases of money to any sort of rebel groups that might be able to rise up against the Maduro government and accelerate the collapse of the Maduro regime if the United States was to conduct some military action against them. And that's something that could also be done as well, because that was heavily done throughout Afghanistan in our initial invasion in the latter part of 2001. So that's also another thing that special forces could be getting involved in at the moment. Either way, anything that they do in the country would most likely be highly effective as long as their cover isn't blown and they're not found. And also, that's the other thing, folks. The Venezuelans would know, at least at this point, to some extent, that that vessel is in the area. That doesn't mean that they'd ever be able to find these special forces groups when they make it in the country. Special forces, much like any special forces ever in the world, are taught as one of their key elements of the trade is to be able to evade any sort of detection, meaning that they'd be pretty slippery and they'd be really hard to find once they make it into Venezuela, and after that they practically disappeared into the country if they make shorefall in any way, shape, or form. However, the Venezuelan government is getting ready, folks, and we were able to hear that, at least for now, the Venezuelan officials are stating that they are ready to fight. I won't be able to show you all that full clip, it's most likely copyrighted, but according to Diosdado Cabello, Minister of the Popular Power for Interior, Justice, and Peace in Venezuela, which is one hell of a mouthful, he stated that if the United States invades Venezuela, they will meet a united Venezuelan people prepared to fight. At the exact time that that was being said, Maduro was putting out a letter to the President of the United States, which stated as follows: His Excellency, the President of the United States of America, respected President of the United States, I'm writing to submit some ideas and informations for your consideration. At present, there are many controversies regarding the relationship between the United States and Venezuela. Amidst these controversies, we have observed a proliferation of disinformation, often referred to as fake news, propagating through various media channels. I recall the fake news that Venezuela had refused to accept migrants back to our country, but this issue was quickly resolved and clarified in a conversation with Ambassador Richard Grenell. To date, this channel has functioned flawlessly. During these initial months of your second administration, we have consistently sought direct communication to address and resolve any issue that arises between our two governments. In recent weeks, the false accusations of links with mafias and drug trafficking gangs by high-ranking Venezuelan authorities have dominated the news. This is the most egregious instance of information against our nation intended to justify an escalation to armed conflict that would inflict catastrophic damage across the entire continent. That's kind of overkilling the whole thing. I had a lengthy discussion with Special Envoy Rick Grenell on this and other issues. In that sense, I'm sending you compelling data on drug production and drug trafficking in South America. This data conclusively demonstrates that Venezuela is a territory free of drug production and a country not relevant in the field of narcotics. This is due to the immense effort made for years by our police and military forces. According to data from the United Nations and other organizations, as well as corroborated by intelligence agencies, 87% of the drugs produced in Colombia are shipped through the Pacific ports, 8% are shipped through the northern Guajira region of Colombia, and only 5% attempt to be transported through Venezuela. However, all drugs seized along the 2,200-kilometer border with Colombia are intercepted and destroyed. It is noteworthy this year we have already neutralized and destroyed more than 70% of the small amount of drugs attempting to cross the border, which is more than 2,200 kilometers long. In accordance with Venezuelan law, we have destroyed 402 international drug trafficking aircraft. These data confirm Venezuela's impeccable record in the fight against international drug trafficking, as expressed by all international organizations and agencies specialized in this matter. President, I hope that together we can defeat the falsehoods that have sullied our relationship, which must be historic and peaceful, as always envisioned by our liberator, Simon Bolivar. I have publicly acknowledged the significant efforts you are making to bring an end to the war you inherited in other regions of the world. For this reason, I support the recent declaration of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, which formally recognized Latin America and the Caribbean as a region of peace on Thursday, September 4th. I respectfully invite you, President, to promote peace throughout constructive dialogue and mutual understanding throughout the hemisphere. These and other issues will also be open for a direct and frank conversation with your special envoy, Rick Grenell, to overcome media noise and fake news. From Caracas, Venezuela, the cradle of liberators, I am committed to defending peace and life. Signed, President President of the Bolivian the Bolivarian Republic, Nicolas Maduro Moros. Please find attached two maps from the World Drug Report.
Yeah, honestly, that settles it. That settles it right there. I think the whole issue is settled now. There turns out to not be any drugs in Venezuela at all. Like, I'm glad we got that cleared up. I was thinking for a long time, I thought that there was a huge cartel operating in Venezuela the whole time. I thought Maduro was at the head of it, but you know, sometimes we just get confused. Like the fake news, like feeds us all these lies and stuff like that about drugs coming out of Venezuela. It's just crazy. I've gotten so mixed up all these days. There's so much fake news flowing around. It's not like there's drug boats taking off from Venezuela daily that are getting struck by the U.S. Navy or anything like that. I just don't know what's happened. How did we get fooled like this, Enforcer?
But you have to remember, Matthew, that in the midst of Colombia's crime commitment, we were able to see that Venezuela has done a lot to stop Colombian crime commitments along their 2,200-kilometer long border with Colombia. And must I remind you that it is 2,200 kilometers long. Venezuelan military authorities and police have been working incredibly long to stop Colombian crime commitments and to be able to help to benefit the United States of America. This whole letter was absolutely ridiculous, folks, because this is suggesting that Venezuela has no drugs inside of their country. I mean, that's just an absolutely baseless claim. I mean, even in America, drugs flow like water. I mean, like, that's the huge problem, is that they do. That's why there is a whole bunch of public debate about this issue inside of Central and South America, is that the drugs flow freely into the United States, even right now. And so that's kind of a bit of a stretch to say there are no drugs in Venezuela literally at all. I mean, it would be a lot more believable, honestly, if you wrote a letter and said, yeah, there's drugs in Venezuela, but our people are using them and they're not being shipped out of the country. I mean, that would sound a lot more believable than there's literally no drugs.
Yeah, you know, also what's crazy as well, wasn't Maduro just standing at the top of the presidential palace the other day screaming and shouting to the crowd, talking about, I'm going to take down America and I'm going to teach them a lesson not to mess with strong Venezuela. Now today he's writing a letter going, please, great majesty, sir, president, great sir, please, good sir, please have mercy on us. There's no drugs coming out of here. Please have mercy. There's nothing here. It's just that fake news. And they've been trying to do it the whole time. It's like, how did he change up like this? Look, he's gotten so scared, man. He is literally shaking. Honestly, he should be scared too. They got the whole military beating their door down at this point.
Dude, this is the equivalent of that crash out that R. Kelly had, like in a diplomatic sense. He's like, I'm fighting for my freaking life, man. Like he's down there in Venezuela, like going off. But this is a ridiculous thing, folks, because I will have to say that I do not believe for a minute that we are eyeballing a war with Venezuela because of the drugs. I'll be the first to say that. But at the same time, for this letter to come out with Maduro saying that there are almost no drugs inside of his country, I mean, that's even just bogus. I mean, this letter is a pitiful attempt at trying to slow everything down. But the truth is, folks, is that this isn't trying to avoid a conflict or try and glaze the president to avoid a conflict. This is trying to buy them time to figure out what to do. Because while Maduro was trying to stall today, China did come out and conduct at least a symbolic action, as the Venezuelan Foreign Minister Yvonne Gil stated that China vowed support for Venezuela after U.S. military strikes on alleged drug boats, and the Chinese have expressed solidarity with Venezuela. So it looks like they might be trying to buy themselves some time for the Chinese to strengthen their connection in Venezuela and possibly find some way to provide arms support to Venezuela to help them out in this upcoming war that appears inevitable at this point because of Chinese influence in Venezuela. And out of all of that, folks, we had the icing on the cake. Truly the greatest thing from the day. We got footage of the drills that are being conducted by the militia of Venezuela in preparation for the United States coming. And I got to tell you, folks, they deployed a dreadnought. I'll show you all the clip, but it's very concerning. These are the drills.
Oh no. Why are they screaming already? They're not even in battle or anything.
I don't even know.
Is this Mule Team 6?
I think it might be.
Man, they're running fast. I'll tell you what, they're lining up at the meal hall. I'll tell you what, they're going to run an assault on the lima beans. I'm going crazy.
I'm telling you, ammo's short, but calories aren't. That's a guaranteed certainty. I gotta be
pulling out the heavy artillery.
At least they beat the famine allegations, I suppose. Like that's kind of like a silver lining of the whole thing. But I'll just be a little bit frank with y'all. This is why militias don't really count for much, because the quality of the personnel involved in national militias is fairly a miss. Like it's a hit and a miss sort of a deal. You could see that there are great people in the national militia and then not so great people. So you know, this is showing y'all what we would be going up against. So I want to remind you all that this is the National Militia of Venezuela, which according to Venezuelan government claims is 5 million strong. And you can see that they're getting women that have practically no fighting experience, equipping them with AKs with single mags, and then they're also just running through the open at wildly slow speeds, presenting very large profiles to the enemy. And you know, it's generally just not anything that would turn out too well for them, at least in practice.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's just something to put out there. But I think that they actually are trying to buy time to see if there is a way that they could either get foreign arms support from the Chinese, where the Chinese provide them with weapons, or to try and get themselves up on a decent enough footing that they might actually be able to have a standing chance to defend themselves for a little bit against the United States, and then try and find a negotiated settlement with the United States to keep Maduro in power. That might also be a likely path of action or a likely idea that the Venezuelans are having right now, considering everything that we're seeing from all ends. Maduro is trying to say...
Also, by the way, whoa, go back to it real quick. Go back to it.
I thought we were trying to get into. Okay, so what were you wanting to see somewhere around here?
So real quick, put this on speed 2 right here. Go to the settings bar real quick.
Let's see here. Playback speed times 2.
Put it on speed 2. There you go. Let's see it now. We need to see this in its full entirety. There we go. Look at that. I'm just saying. We had to go back and look at this, folks. This is part of analysis. You got to make sure you got the visual stuff down. I'm not. I honestly, these look like civilians to me. Like, are these civilians that they just put in like red shirts or something?
Yeah, I mean, this is what the militia is. It's literally just armed citizenry.
Yeah, honestly, do they even have like a real military that actually knows what they're doing, or is this pretty much it?
They do. They're technically about 119,000 strong in just the Venezuelan army. But the issue is that we don't really think they're incredibly competent, and we think that corruption's running rife to the point that those units are most likely not at any level of combat effectiveness.
Yeah, honestly, they're not combat effective at all. Also, they don't even seem to know how to actually carry the weapon at all either. So, yeah, this is tough right here. It's kind of hard to believe they'd even put this on camera for people to see this because it's so bad. It's just honestly awful. Like, they're going to be in some foul shape if they actually get some type of raid happening on them or something. They're going to be in some very foul shape.
I wish we had that Battlefield 1 line, Matthew, where they said, the enemy has deployed a dreadnought. like that would be a
Yeah.
little appropriate, at least at the moment. But, like putting everything together, folks, just to paint the picture, because this is the scene that we're getting today. Maduro's asking for talks with the United States. China's at least showing some kind of interest at possibly providing the Venezuelans with a little support. Nothing directly in the support of arms, well, at least in force of arms, with Chinese forces showing up to help them out, but possibly giving them some weapons. And then we're also seeing that the Venezuelan military is working overtime, not only to try and get the military ready to defend the country, the regular army, but to also try and raise the armed citizenry to help defend the country as well. So everything looks to be appearing that this letter sent by Maduro today to the United States is trying to buy them a little bit of a window so that way they can try and improve their despotic situation at the moment, at least with facing down the United States directly. Now, that brings us to the big question. Considering that Maduro is stalling, he's most likely stalling to see what the Chinese will do for Venezuela to try and support them. And that then brings us to the question of what in the hell would China try and do in this little moment of time that Maduro has bought Venezuela, if an attack is coming. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right. So right now we're hearing that China, specifically in Beijing, has issued solidarity with Venezuela, and they vow support against the U.S. aggression. So we're not really sure what that means, but what are your thoughts about that? And it looks like 62% said China will eventually abandon Venezuela when it comes to a head, while 16% said China will defend Venezuela, and 15% said it's a 50-50 chance of either. And I would say I don't really see China getting bogged down in Venezuela, to be perfectly honest. While China would love to have their oil resources out of Venezuela, like for example, extract that very dirty oil that Venezuela has to offer, I don't think they're going to go to war over it. I would be kind of shocked if they did. It's possible, but I would say the odds of that are pretty low. So I think the solidarity is as good as basically what it sounds like, basically nothing. When someone says they're in solidarity with something, that means, okay, we want to pretend like we're supporting you, but we're really not going to be there for you when it comes to an issue. So I don't think they will personally. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would think that there is going to be no real support that would come from China towards Venezuela if this went into a war. There are huge problems and concerns, folks, with China even being able to get to Venezuela at the moment. And let me try and measure that out for y'all. Let's say that they just pulled forces from the central military district, so they would leave at the port of Qingdao, which is a pretty decent spot to start. And then they had to make their way all the way down to Venezuela. They can't use the Panama Canal. That would most likely be closed off to them, at least at this moment. The United States would pressure the Panamanians to close that off. So if they were to take the most likely route, let me see if I can do this right here really quickly, by how the crow flies, at least, or the quickest way that they could get around, that is about a 19,000 mile long supply venture to get a ship from China laden with supplies to Venezuela. China has no air bases in the Pacific to be able to airlift stuff to Venezuela, so that's out of the picture entirely, and it would be entirely sea lift based. So that supply line is 19,000 miles long at a minimum, which is quite literally impossible. They could try and provide arms to Venezuela before this whole thing breaks out, but getting armed forces into Venezuela and then trying to hold it down, that is going to be damn near impossible for the Chinese just because of how long the supply route would be. Now, let's say that they somehow had access to the Panama Canal, and let's try and shorten down the route as much as we can. That would still be about a 13,000 mile long venture for a Chinese supply line, and the supply line also passes through the Panama Canal, which could end up being a choke point. So all of that means there is no way for them to get to Venezuela really at this moment and to be able to support their own forces fighting on the behalf of the Venezuelans. So armed involvement of the Chinese in support of Venezuela is entirely out of the picture. The only thing that is in the picture is that they could give the Venezuelans some weapons, and if they do, it mostly would be air defense based, like an HQ-9B or something along those lines, and that would still take months to train the Venezuelans to any level of proficiency on that system, meaning that even if they did provide the system, it would be useless if this conflict's coming up in about 2 months. So in a sense, there's really no way that China could do anything in a practical term for the Venezuelans in their support, so I'd have to be with the 63% for just the actual practicality of helping out Venezuela from a Chinese perspective. They're practically on their own, and the Chinese wouldn't abandon them by choice, they just abandon them because there's really no other option.
Yeah, I think China's smarter than us on this issue. I think they're smarter not to get bogged down in Venezuela because China has got their own interests going on right now, too. Honestly, China is in a similar position that the U.S. is in right now. The U.S. is supporting Ukraine to fight Russia, and China is supporting Russia to fight Ukraine, which is essentially the United States in their view. So both countries are caught up in a proxy war right now, so they're kind of at the same footing. And there's literally an instant spark in that room right now inside of Ukraine. It could spill over into Europe, spill over into NATO countries, and then you got all these different countries that are tangled up in this big web of proxy wars. All of a sudden, they're at war with each other. So I don't think China would be strategically, I guess you'd say, inept enough to get tied up in Venezuela right now. I think they would not do that. The U.S., on the other hand, seems to be wanting to get bogged down there for some reason. So I just don't think that China would show up personally.
I would say I don't really think the Chinese would show up at all either. And also, folks, if we're going with the shortest supply line that China could get, which is about 12.8 thousand miles to Venezuela, we also have to consider that U.S. sea lift capabilities, which could come from the entirety of the East Coast or from the Gulf of Mexico, would be a lot shorter in distance than the Chinese. Let's say, for example, the U.S. sea lift capabilities are primarily operating out of Newport News in Virginia. So they would skirt the coast down to Puerto Rico and then straight to Venezuela. That is a 2,000-mile long supply line. And let's make it even shorter by saying that these forces would operate out of a place like Tampa or Miami and make their way down. So if they were to skirt around Cuba and then straight down to Venezuela, that's about a 1,800-mile long supply line. Or if they shot off out of Miami through the Bahamas and down to Puerto Rico and then towards Venezuela, that's about a 1,500-mile long supply line. So China's supply line at the shortest would still be 12 times longer than our supply lines at their shortest, and about the same ratio exists at the longest rate or distances of both supply lines from China and the U.S. So the U.S. by sea lift capability, considering that China and America have about the same sea lift capabilities in terms of tonnage of supplies, American supply rates would be 12 times faster and 12 times larger in tonnage per any given period of time, like over a month's period, than China's ability to supply any forces in Venezuela, meaning that it's entirely lost from the supply side of the conflict before Chinese forces even made it on shore into Venezuela to help them out. And on top of that, giving the Venezuelans weapons, once again, Chinese supply lines are 12 times longer than the United States, meaning that the turnaround time to get more supplies into Venezuela is 12 times longer than America's, and they still wouldn't be able to provide Venezuela with enough arms, support, or weaponry to be able to keep them going in that kind of a situation. But we actually have some breaking news coming out at the moment. And Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so we do have some pretty big breaking news right here, and once again, take this with a grain of salt. I'm just now seeing this, but we are now hearing reports of sightings over Puerto Rico of what appears to be the launch of a UGM-133 Trident II submarine-launched ballistic missile from either a U.S. or Royal Navy nuclear-powered ballistic submarine in the northern Atlantic. So let's see here. We don't have any official statement from either the U.S. or Britain on this issue, though the object in the sky was confirmed to be a military test by the Caribbean Astronomy Society, according to Ocean Defender on Twitter. So, Enforcer, we do have some video of this right here. It appears to be a Trident II nuclear-capable missile, which might have been tested, fired, or something right now. So let's take a look at this and see what this is about, because right now I'm kind of at a loss on this one.
Would this be copyrighted?
Let me do a quick scan of it real quick.
I hate to kill the vibe here, but this might actually I'm you know how it happened last time when we covered something in America, and that was that was rough in the post.
So just sort of like scan the video to the middle part where you just get an image showing the SLBM here instead of showing the actual video, just in case copyright issues are a thing.
So here is a picture of the test, at least right there.
Yeah, so it's believed to be, that's a Trident II, believed to be. And once again, take that with a grain of salt. This is a very early report. It literally was just spotted in the skies. So interesting. If that is a Trident II being launched from a submarine, this is near Puerto Rico, at least, or this is a sighting from Puerto Rico. So I'm not sure why they'd be doing that unless it was a sudden, unannounced test. So quite interesting to see that.
That is very interesting, and it does appear that a lot of people are saying that's a Trident II D5LE by the U.S. Navy. That apparently was, let's see. Wait, this is from, oh, sorry, let me go to this one. Let's see, a UGM-133 Trident II. Let's go pull up the Trident II and try and get some information on it. Trident II. Ah, yes, the lipstick. The lipstick. Let's see here. They cost about 30 million a piece, 31 million really. And it has a range of 7,500 miles, or at least more than 7,500 miles. So this is interesting. We don't know if it's exactly a Trident II, but it is quite interesting. And we don't know if that was just a pre-planned test of a Trident II, that's likely, or if this has something to do with nuclear posturing or deterrence globally. It's a little bit unclear at the moment, but quite interesting to see that it happened around Puerto Rico, because this footage appears to have been taken inside of Puerto Rico, in one of the larger cities, like Arecibo or anywhere else like San Juan inside of the island. So interesting to note.
And also what's interesting about it as well is, by the way, the last time this Trident II was tested, if this is a Trident II that was launched, it was back in 2021 near Florida. So technically Puerto Rico can see Florida, but it's a far ways off. And it was tested in Cape Canaveral last time. So I don't know how many miles away that would be. What is that, like 600, 700 miles away from Puerto Rico or something like that?
I think it's about that distance. Let me see here. Oh yeah, about that.
Oh no, from Puerto Rico to Florida, Cape Canaveral.
Like, I'm sorry, I was trying to get some data and information, but about 1,000 miles actually to Miami.
Interesting. So yeah, I mean, it's a pretty far ways away. I mean, it's possible they could see it from that distance, I think, but that's a pretty far distance right there. Also, typically when they test things like this, typically I believe we do get an announcement ahead of time before they test it. This time we do not see any announcement of any sort, at least on my end. Maybe I'm missing it, but I don't see it from any of my sources. So that is an interesting thing. It seems to be unannounced, which is sort of out of the norm. So I'm going to try to see if I can see. Also, Tom Exman said, "Do you see any airspace being closed, Matt, in the area?" I'm going to check on that because this just happened. So we'll check on that and we'll report back when we hear something.
And we will be trying to look into that story through the course of the night, but a fairly interesting development in the midst of us actually covering the Caribbean news at this moment right now. You know something, folks? I was just wondering, you know, if with those narco boats wandering around, and the fact that terrorists are technically treated as pirates in the modern day, and they're really given no quarter by anyone under international law, does that mean that this is technically the next installment of Pirates of the Caribbean?
Matt, I tell you what, they could be road pirates.
Yar! Like, I drive a Harley. But anyways, moving on from that, it is a very interesting string of developments that has been going on down here in the Caribbean, and we have had no shortage today of further developments and information out of that area. Oh, by the way, speaking of some American developments, we also were able to hear from the United States of America today that, Jelani, or as they call him now, Ahmed al-Shara, has arrived today inside of the United States of America. And apparently, this is the first time that a Syrian president has done so since 1967, in 58 years. That is a long time. I'm sure that U.S. signaling and posturing on this matter was entirely within bounds and made it appear that we didn't invite a terrorist into the United States of America. Oh? What's this? This was issued today by the I'm sorry.
That was back in 2017,
this is
actually.
back in 2017. I misstated that right there. But you know something, folks? That's actually really interesting here because this guy, Mohammed al-Jolani, he seems a little bit familiar, like he looks similar to this guy that came to America today. Like, I just want to show y'all this guy again because it's a little bit interesting that they have different names, but they look so similar, Look at that. It's so bizarre.
Yeah. I tell you what, it's crazy what a good haircut and a suit will do for somebody. It's really crazy. It's almost like he's almost unrecognizable, actually. But actually, I went and dug this post back up in Forcer today. I went and dug this back up all the way back from 2017 just to make the point that this guy was once on the terrorist registry at one point, and they had a $10 million reward out for him, which is 1/5 the reward that they have out for Maduro in Venezuela right now. So this guy was once a subject of ire of the United States, and now he finds himself in charge of Syria, and he finds himself coming here on a private jet all the way to the United States to meet with U.S. officials. It's kind of weird how the tables turn sometimes.
It is a little weird, folks. He went from terrorist with a $10 million bounty to terrorist with a $10 million suit. What a change. Like, what a glow up. He's got the sunglasses and everything. He can't be a terrorist now. He's not wearing the the little deal. He's not wearing the camo and the headpiece and everything. He's got some sunglasses, a nice fade, and a suit with no tie. Apparently that's just the fashion these days, is to not wear a tie anymore. Which I think is a little sloppy looking, but I can't judge, the guy's the president of Syria. But a little bit interesting how he went from this to this. He's in America today. It's so interesting, folks, how it evolved from in the early 2000s, we don't negotiate to terrorists, and also I want to make this quite clear, folks, that this isn't really something that's entirely the failing of this administration. Of course, it's a lot more of a gray area and a lot more murky than a lot of people like to make it out to be, but it was actually the prior administration that actually brought the HTS off the terrorist designation list and pretty much recognized Jelani here as the president of Syria. And the current administration has carried through that. Kind of a very similar sort of thing with what happened in Afghanistan. The current president was the one who actually had his people sign off on the complete withdrawal, and then the last president carried it on through, although it was started by him. So a little bit of an interesting thing with that. I'd be honest with y'all, this guy is no guy that the United States ought to be affiliating with in any single way, and I think that we really should be putting the Syrian interim government back on the terrorist designation, because the way that they had been going through the whole of Syria that's under their control and conducting attacks on the Druze, conducting attacks on the Alawite Arabs, and quite literally everyone else that isn't a Sunni Arab that's inside the Syrian interim government, it is as bad, or if not worse, than the time under Bashar al-Assad. And that was pretty hard to beat. Bashar al-Assad was pretty bad, and this guy has pretty much gotten up there and is maybe even besting him at this point, and he's hardly been in charge of Syria for any point of time at all. This guy is an extremist. The HTS, which is the group that this guy ran, the Tahrir al-Sham, which is what that stands for, it was a splinter cell and a evolution of the original Al-Qaeda cell that conducted the attacks on the United States in 2001 that sent us over into Afghanistan and kept us there for 20 years. This is an evolution of one of the splinter cells of Al-Qaeda, and this guy led it. So I don't really think it's a good idea to take people like this who have clearly made themselves out by their own actions and doings over the past year to be a full-on terrorist still, and then legitimize them, and on top of that, let them visit the United States in an official capacity as the representative of the president of the Syrian interim government. I don't really think this is a good move, and I would have to say that this is once again another foreign policy misstep on the behalf of the last administration and the current administration. The last administration for taking him off the terrorist designation, and the current administration not putting him back on the terrorist designation, but also bringing him here to America. This is a bad idea, and this is going to end up biting us later, at least in my honest 2 cents.
Yeah, I would say so. Also, by the way, folks, jumping away from this piece of news real quick, I believe I've solved the mystery about the launch that we're seeing right now that was spotted from Puerto Rico. Enforcer, I do have some coordinates for you that you can actually look up on Google Maps. It's a alleged launch point for this missile, and I'm going to put those right there in the chat. We have a longitude latitude there. So we're hearing that according to sources, it looks like there was a suborbital launch, probably of a Trident II missile from a U.S. Navy submarine at those coordinates right there that were provided, about 450 kilometers east of Cape Canaveral. And it does appear that back on September the 16th, which I think that's the wrong coordinates right there, by the way. That's putting in India.
I put in exactly what I got, man. It would this is exactly those coordinates, apparently.
Yeah, I'll go back and check them again real quick. Maybe they got put in wrong or copied wrong. But also, by the way, back to what I was saying, back on September the 16th, which was about 5 or 6 days ago, there were some navigational warnings that were issued over the Atlantic, and generally around the same area in which we saw this launch. And also, unfortunately, you can reference that post on our Twitter page as well. It's the second from the top. And you can actually see there are issued warnings for that region about some type of atmospheric test that was going to take place. And it looks like we have a potential flight path as well for that missile going through here. There it is right there on the screen that you can see the flight path. So that was what we were seeing. And also, we were seeing as well that apparently there was a defense agency Gulfstream in the area as well, which typically monitors hypersonic missile tests. And that was also there as well. So it does appear that it was a test of a Trident missile. So it's not totally unexpected, but it wasn't announced either. They didn't tell us what they were going to be testing, but it does appear to be that is the case.
Very interesting. And I would assume that the GPS coordinates that we were supposed to have was supposed to put us somewhere up here, just northeast of the Bahamas. But it put us inside of an area just to the west of New Delhi. And around Haryana. So a little bit weird with that, because if I put that in again, right here, yeah, it takes us to this exact spot right here, west of New Delhi for some reason, in Haryana. So I don't know why that's the case, but that appears to be the area of the Atlantic, at least here on this map, where the launch was actually conducted. And it appears that it's going to have a splashdown somewhere around the Gulf of Guinea, which is around right here. Which, by the way, folks, a little fun fact, the U.S. Sixth Fleet keeps a permanent presence right now in the Gulf of Guinea because of the appearance of low sulfur oil in a lot of the Central African countries, as well as those along the Ivory Coast. So they keep a permanent presence there to stop the sneaky Chinese from sneaking in there and trying to take advantage of, that oil. So with that, I hope that does.
Also, try these coordinates this time. Go ahead and copy and paste those into there. Let's put in the chat right there. You go put those right into Google Maps.
Man, put that in your pipe and smoke it. Let's see if we can use these, and hopefully this will be accurate this time. So, oh yes, I see you know your coordinates well. Good one. And this is
that actually appears to match up with the exact spot. Also, on the prediction maps that we have here showing splashdown points and launch points, that does appear to match up nearly exactly. So that appears to be what that was, folks. It appears to have been a Trident missile test that was launched from that area, and that shows you how far away that can be viewed. You see Puerto Rico is almost 1,000 miles away. In fact, it's probably well over 1,000 miles away. So that was how large that missile was in the sky, and how much of a like a scene that it created was. It was that far away and filmed from Puerto Rico. It was that bright.
And that is actually pretty crazy. I bet you could see that from the whole of Florida, really, and really the whole of the East Coast. I think the East Coast is closer than Puerto Rico was to that test. Let's see. Yeah, actually, it's way closer, so you could really easily see that test from really anywhere along the East Coast. As a matter of fact, you could probably see that test about as far away as New York City, or even Providence, Rhode Island, actually, if you're seeing it all the way from Puerto Rico. Because Puerto Rico is about 900 or so miles away from that.
That is crazy, honestly. I was trying to see if I can get any more footage of it here that might not be with any copyright issues. Also, by the way, folks, just to let y'all know, typically we have the right to show footage. Like, for example, under fair use, we can show it for news reporting purposes as long as we add commentary to it. But the catch is we don't want to take the risk, because sometimes people get very litigious over it and they don't understand how fair use works. So they might copyright strike us anyway, and then that causes an issue with the channel. So out of an abundance of caution, we're careful about showing footage originating from the U.S. territories. But we do have an image enforcer here showing the missile from two different spots inside of Puerto Rico. It's our third post down, I believe. You'll see an image showing the two launches. There it is right there. Yeah, you can see on the left, you can see part of the, like, I don't know what you call that, the trail of the missile, I guess you could say, sort of lighting up the sky. Yeah, the tail of the missile. And then on the right, you can see it higher up in the sky. So that was 1,000+ miles away from where this was filmed that you're seeing right there in these pictures.
It really is impressive to see these missiles exit the atmosphere, or any rockets for that matter. It's always a really interesting sort of a visual phenomenon, because the I guess you could say, spray of the exhaust from the nozzle of the rocket starts to dissipate in an incredibly interesting way because it's practically outside of the Earth's atmosphere, and it creates these interesting sorts of displays that you can see here, like we're seeing in these pictures. Really interesting sort of stuff. And also, really quickly, folks, to add on to the whole copyright thing, because I know a lot of people are like, fair use, baby! This is something very interesting about how copyright works and how we've kind of figured out it works in sort of a practice, is that we can argue fair use as a defense, but the problem is that if someone doesn't want to relent on that, it becomes a whole deal. It's a huge issue, and then we pretty much have to go through an extremely long battle, and by then it's months later, and the problem is over at that point. No one's even looking at that video or that stream, so we have to be very careful about that sort of a thing, because there can be huge issues with that, and you can't really argue fair use as a shield against copyrights or copyright strikes on showing some stuff. It's really more so of a defense when someone does that to you. You can go, oh, no, I have fair use because I was using it in this way, and it's a whole rigmarole from there. So with that in mind, we really can't show much of anything that's filmed inside the United States of America because it's extremely litigious to try and defend ourselves as far as fair use goes with that sort of a deal. But beyond that, though, that is quite interesting to see, that little ICBM test out there near to the coast of Florida. And also, you know something else, Mandy? I wonder what that looks like from the commercial ships passing through that area.
I wonder. Also, by the way, I doubt you could see it from Venezuela. That might be too far away. But yeah, you know, if Maduro saw that, that would have been probably caused a heart attack right there. If you saw that one, seeing like literally an SLBM flying over in your view in your sky, that would be probably a shit the pants moment right there.
Yeah, I would have to say, I would think that Maduro would be like horking down on an empanada at that point in panic. He'd be like, it's the last one I'm having. But still, I would have to say, very interesting developments down in the Caribbean tonight, by far. Also, I saw, let's see, someone say, someone said, PR deserves statehood after all this. That's never going to happen. They'd have to find someone else to bring in at the same time. And that's the reason why this will never become a state. And also, folks, Washington, D.C. should never become a state. Like, that's not even a political thing. That's just an administrative thing. Because if you make Washington, D.C. a state, then the entire federal government is now inside of a state, which is a huge issue. That's why the District of Columbia exists at all, is that they found out originally that putting the seat of federal power in the country within the boundaries or borders of a state that's under the jurisdiction or control of that state, it ends up causing a great deal of, I guess you could say, conflict of interest between the federal government and the state, and if the state doesn't like what the federal government's doing because their seat of power is inside of a state, they can pretty much start to punish the federal government, which shouldn't exist, and that's why Washington, D.C. is the seat of all federal power in the country, and it's not a state, it's a district, and a federal one at that. So that's why you'll probably never see Puerto Rico brought on, because every single time anyone tries to do that, they always try and say, we'll make Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. a state simultaneously. And one, from an administrative standpoint, making Washington, D.C. a state makes no sense. And two, if you add Puerto Rico in, the fear would be, like, just to explain it clearly, the fear would be is that Puerto Rico would add 2 Democratic senators inside of the Senate permanently, and there would be no 2 additional Republican senators being added on at the same time to provide what is called balance. So that's why they would probably never be added in, because there is no territory, at least at the moment that I've heard of, that leans right, that could be accepted into statehood at the exact same time as Puerto Rico. That's nothing political, that's just literally the reason why it's never happened so far, and that's also why you would see that Alaska and Hawaii were ratified into statehood practically simultaneously, because even back then, Hawaii leaned towards voting Democrat, meaning 2 new Democrat senators in the Senate, and then Alaska leaned more towards the Republican side, meaning 2 new Republican senators in the Senate, and maintaining that quote-unquote balance. A lot of games are played with that sort of a deal with accepting states into statehood nowadays, and that's the big one. But anyways, with that, folks, it is time for us to move on into the rest of our news for the night, as we do have quite a deal more. A lot more, actually. And you know, folks, we've had such a fun time covering news tonight. It's an hour and 20 minutes in, and we haven't gotten to our first question segment. We haven't even called out any top donors yet, and we haven't even gotten to, like, the gajillions other pieces of news that we have around the rest of the world. But really quickly, Matthew, I understand that this fundraiser has gotten to $1,902 raised out of the $2,500 goal. That is a lot of money being given to Nova Ukraine. That is a load. That'll help them out a great deal. Do we have a top donor list, Matthew, that we could call out here to recognize our top donors and give a recognition to everyone who supported the fundraiser tonight for helping to get it to this point and hopefully over the goal here very soon?
Yes, we do. We do have a long list of top donors so far, and to call them off, we have a $300 support, the largest of the night, from James Hughes. And a huge shout out to James Hughes for that massive donation to the fundraiser.
Hey!
Also, a big shout out to Activista for throwing in a 100, along with Hal Rose and Bobby43, also known as LC39A. And then we had a 50 from Old Warrior, as a 50 from Troll, as well as Nightmare Before Christmas, Jeff Steidel, as well as a 20 from Doug Halstead, and also a 5 from Eugene Haynes. And thank you very much to all y'all once again for donating tonight to the fundraiser. And also, by the way, Doug's was actually a super chat. I forgot to green that one out right there. So that was a super chat on that one. But also a huge shout out to Eugene Hayes for throwing in a 5 to the donation for the fundraiser as well. And also a huge thanks to everybody else that we did not call off for throwing in a donation as well, because all these donations add up and help us to reach the $1,902 figure that we're currently sitting at right now. But Enforcer, what say you?
I gotta say, what a hell of a fundraiser so far. We are at $1,902, and I gotta give a massive shout out to all of the top donors and all of the donors we weren't able to call out for getting this fundraiser to this point right now. We are getting so close to the fundraiser goal. We are only $598 away. That isn't that far, and I know the Lee Spring Army will hit that goal before the end of the night, because they always have. They've never missed a fundraiser goal, and I gotta say that it's amazing to know that so many people, 1,306 days into us, pretty much starting out these Sunday night fundraisers that many years ago, are continuing to support these fundraisers and getting them past the fundraiser goals in support of the folks overseas in war-torn countries like Ukraine, and in support of Western and American interests around the world. So a massive shout out and appreciation and thanks to all of y'all once again. And folks, before we move on into the rest of their news, I want to make sure that we get 3 questions here really quickly, and then we'll get on into the rest of all the news that we have tonight. So Matthew, what are some folks asking, and what are we answering?
All right, so we did get 3 super chats, and YouTube still has the thing where people can throw in super chats on our Sunday night fundraiser stream, so that is still a thing. But nonetheless, we are going to thank the super chatters tonight. And tonight we had Doug Halstead who threw in a 20, and thank you very much, Doug, for that support. He said the other night someone mentioned naming our Iron Dome. He said, I recommend we call it Magnum. Maximum protection, and the coverage is as big as you need it to be. I wonder about that.
I don't know. I mean, if we're going to do that, I mean, why don't we just call that thing the Big Rubber? like why don't we just call it like I think that's a great one. It's nationwide protection, and it's great. And hopefully there will be no holes in it. Just like the real thing. Just like the real thing. Why not? That's a little bit on the nose as far as a joke, but I think folks will get a good crack out of that one. But still, the interesting idea. And we'll try and write a letter to the president and send that to him as a suggestion. I hope that it will be taken well. You'll probably see us mentioned in a Truth Social here in the future. These stupid people, the enforcers, suggested that we call it Magnum or Big Rubber. They're absolutely stupid, terrible ratings. Their show is going downhill. And then we'll be like, well, that's kind of like a fair critique at that point. But still, good idea. Not a bad one. And it got me a pretty good laugh. But with that, it is time for us to move on into the second question of this segment.
All right, so our second one here is a super chat from No Please, and they said the 2nd Caloric Consumption Regiment, the 2nd CCR of the Venezuelan Army.
I'd have to be honest with you. That one might actually be effective. I actually feel like those folks had to be put into the tank regiments. I feel like they'd be very effective in that role. But still, beyond that, I hope that does address that well. Everyone has a place in the military. It's just about finding out where that is and when. But still, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the last question of the segment, and then we're going to be moving on into the rest of the news.
And this one goes to Jedi, who said, y'all got an idea on how much longer it'll be before NATO gets involved or responds to the Russian incursions?
I unfortunately have no clue. Foreign policy is a little bit topsy-turvy at the moment and doesn't really make any sense at all. We're about to get into that here in a little bit, but once again, folks, I'm not trying to be political here. It's just that when stuff doesn't make sense, there's no way to not point that out. I feel like it would be political for us to not point that out than it would be to point that out at this point, because when, we're saying we're leaving Europe because we can't be the world police, but then we threaten Afghanistan with being in Afghanistan for another 20 years to world police the Chinese. I mean, it's really hard not to point that out and say that that makes no sense. But as far as foreign policy is going right now, I can't even tell you what the direction is. And honestly, to be honest, I'm tired, boss. I'm worn out on this thing. I can't really understand it anymore. I can't make any sense of it. It's best to not even try and make sense of it, because I think, it doesn't make any sense. So you drive yourself crazy trying to justify and make reasons for what we're doing, because it's the president of peace, no new wars, but we will go into Afghanistan for another 20 years, and we'll also invade Venezuela if we need to. But at the same time, while we're threatening 2 wars, we are also the president of peace, so we will stop a war between India and Pakistan with a cheap ceasefire, as well as Thailand and Cambodia with a cheap ceasefire. We will bomb the Iranians and provoke them with a direct armed action, but not completely destroy their nuclear weaponry, which would be a fairly important thing. We conduct airstrikes on the Houthis just like the last administration, which did nothing because they're attacking international shipping again. And then, as far as the Israelis, where the bank's running dry on everything and we can't give anyone money, but we can give the Israelis another $6 billion free in weaponry. We can find that money when we need it. And then with Ukraine needs to be able to pay their own bill and buy their own weapons, although clearly the Russians are starting to target and threaten the West, and that's why it's good to give Ukraine money and weapons, or more so just weapons, because they're able to grind down the very threat that would invade NATO in the future. So that's like the whole thing that isn't really making any sense at this point. When you put all that together, it makes no sense. And that's why it's really hard to even analyze whether or not we would be in Europe or helping anyone there, or in Taiwan, or the Middle East, or anything else for that matter, because I just have no clue what we're even doing at this point. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address it the best I can. Great question. And with that, it is time for us to move on into the rest of the news, which we have plenty of. We were able to hear that North Korea stated today that they will not abandon their nuclear weapons. Kim Jong-un declared denuclearization no longer valid. This has actually been, crazily enough, folks, something that Kim Jong-un has stated is a possibility up until now. Like, y'all would not believe that. We all know that they never give up the nuclear weapons, but at least publicly, they never said this up until today. So this is actually a new development. He vows North Korea will never abandon its nuclear force, ruling out talks with the U.S. or reunification with South Korea, which was actually abandoned in prior years from now in this decade, because the North Koreans are starting to change everything about their country. They're starting to view themselves as an independent nation, pretty much separate from the Korean identity of old, of the Kingdom of Joseon, which has been a unifying sort of a nationalist prerogative by both South Korea and North Korea, is to eventually recreate the Kingdom of Joseon, or the territory of it, under either a communist government in North Korea or a democratic hyper-capitalist government in South Korea. That appears to no longer be the ambition of North Korea, which is kind of a little bit funny, because South Korea has completely abandoned that notion in decades prior, because North Korea is so poor and derelict and poverty-stricken that if the two countries combined, North Korea would literally crash South Korea overnight if the two countries unify in the current condition they're in right now. So a little bit of an interesting development out of North Korea. And moving on from that and into Afghanistan, we were able to hear that the President of the United States threatened the Taliban today, stating that the United States is ready to invade Afghanistan and occupy them for another 20 years, and the Taliban responded today, we're ready to fight for another 20 years, making it fairly clear that they're not looking at all for the United States to return. And they also reiterated today that a U.S. deal on Bagram was not possible, and says that, that was according to an Afghan Taliban official, and according to his statements, a deal over even an inch of Afghanistan soil is not possible. We don't need it, as in, we don't need a deal with the United States. So it's quite clear that at this point the ship sailed. We lost Bagram, generally because the current administration in their prior term signed it away in Doha in 2020, and then the next administration after that followed through and completely abandoned it. I'll be honest with y'all, reassessing that today, it appears that, to just be a little bit straight up with y'all, it appears that the withdrawal from Afghanistan was a mistake from square one, because I've been trying to do a little bit of digging into that, and there were loads of people when the Doha Agreement was signed in 2020, in February 29th of that year, and a load of, more so than that, a load of detractors to the treaty that were saying that it appeared to be some sort of an attempt to show that we were no longer going to be in Afghanistan, and that it's not really founded in any strong principle or precedent, and that it may be some sort of an attempt to try and favor, curry favor with the U.S. public moving into that election cycle that year. So then we heard later, and this is not trying to be political, folks, this is actually what people back then were saying, according to publishings and articles that I was able to get back then, and also from my own research that I compiled for a video that I made on it, literally just days after Afghanistan collapsed. But it also appears that the next administration after that continued it along for the exact same reason, that they thought that it was politically popular in the country to leave Afghanistan. So a little bit interesting with that. It seems that the entire move to leave Afghanistan was one started by this current administration in our last term because they thought it would be politically popular. And then the next administration after that carried through with it because they also thought that it would end up becoming pretty politically popular and that they could claim that they were the ones who left Afghanistan. And really the reality is that it ended up in a complete disaster and we lost one of the most important air bases in the entirety of Central Asia. So not really a good move. And once again, folks, it kind of is a little bit important to point out, at least at that point, maybe people ought to not be that prioritized on trying to curry favor with the voting populace, and they ought to look out for the long-term safety and security of U.S. foreign policy interest overseas. Because it seems as though both administrations were trying to pursue that sort of aim, at least with following through with this, and it ended up not turning out well, really, for any of us in this country. So, moving on out of Afghanistan, also, by the way, before we move on out of Afghanistan, we did hear about that Taliban statement that they would fight for another 20 years, and I'll be honest with y'all, I think this is probably the best news the Taliban got recently. They've been stuck in those stuffy office spaces in Kabul, having to try and run a whole country after they took over the place, and they figured out that that's not all that it's cracked up to be. So the U.S. reinvading their country and everyone just getting back to hiding out in caves and shooting at the U.S. Army probably sounds like a decent deal to them because it gets them out of the administrative work again and back out there into the mountains and caves that they used to fight in before. So, Matthew, what are people thinking about that? What are you thinking about that as well?
All right, so it looks like 80% of the audience, the overwhelming majority, said the Taliban aren't bluffing on this one. They actually will fight for 20 more years if the U.S. reinvades, while 11% said the Taliban are bluffing and 5% said it's a 50-50 chance of either. And I would say this, the Taliban are definitely not bluffing. You can take that one to the bank. The Taliban are an extremist group, and they are motivated by extremist ideology. Those type of people do not bluff when it comes to fighting on their own home turf. So we were there for 20 years before fighting the Taliban, and we would be there another 20 years. I can almost guarantee you that if we reinvaded. It would be a slog, and it would not be good. We'd get bogged down there just like we got bogged down last time. And also, we lost, I can't remember the exact number of guys we lost. We definitely lost some guys in Afghanistan over those 20 years, and then we lost some when we were leaving too. So there's no reason to go back to Afghanistan. We already gave the base up. We've beat that horse into the ground at this point, and we should stay out because even though I despise the Taliban, we don't want to get our forces back into trouble yet again. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that the Taliban certainly aren't bluffing, and this is a disaster that should be left to the past. Reinvading Afghanistan is a stupid idea. I think everyone in the country can agree on that one. Nobody expected that to come around, by the way, again, that this would even be something that we'd have to talk about. So anyone who's hopping on this bandwagon and saying that this is a good idea, they're just doing it because they drink the Kool-Aid. This is a stupid idea. Everyone can agree on that. We left the country. We left it in disaster. Everything that we had built there for 20 years completely collapsed because we really weren't ready to leave at that point, and neither was the Afghan government ready for us to leave at that point. And yet we did, and it ended up being a disaster. So best to just leave that to the past. Mistakes were made, not the greatest moves. But what can you do? It's already been written in the pages of history, and there's no way to go back and change that. And I don't really think that going into Afghanistan and fighting and getting our men killed over there, again, just to hold one air base, is really that worth it, at least for now. We lost about, I think it was 37 to 3,900 men in Afghanistan over about 20 years, which, compared to the war in Ukraine, that's actually light work. The Russians lose that in about 3 days. We lost that in 20 years in Afghanistan. But at the same time, I don't really like the idea of going back there because we are already gone. And on top of that, it's over at this point. I mean, the bad decisions were made back then. We're just going to have to play the cards we're dealt with now. That's just the truth of it. But anyways, moving on from that and on over into Syria, we also, well, actually on down to Egypt and the Sinai, because we already covered the Damascus clip that we had earlier today. But we also got to see that Egyptian forces have built up once again near the border. Take a little gander at this. Loads of M60s.
Holy moly. Man, they're not wanting the Gazans in their territory. That's for damn sure.
Man, honestly, I think they're more scared of the Gazans than the Israelis.
Yeah, really. I guess they think the Gazans are going to make a bolt for over the border. I guess I assume, or maybe they're scared of the Israelis.
I'll be honest with you, I really don't even know. Like the Egyptians haven't.
Though.
Yeah, the Egyptians haven't made a statement about this, at least recently. This is incredibly close, by the way. This is right on the wall with Gaza. But quite a large buildup of Russian forces here. Well, sorry, not Russian, Egyptian. I'm already getting my mind ready for the Ukraine war news, but
I was about to say, if that's Russian, we're in trouble.
for the first time ever. But anyways, that's the end of that clip. And moving on from that and out of that area, we have also been able to hear inside of Europe some other interesting developments today. For one, we are hearing that that in Brussels there will be a discussion in NATO about Russian airspace violations in Estonia on Tuesday. That's also when we'll be eating the birds. In the meantime, in the United Nations, they will also be having a Security Council meeting on Monday at Estonia's request, also on the fighter jet violation of their airspace. The Germans responded to a coot today, which was apparently wandering around their airspace, and they told them that German airspace is no place for the elderly, and they turned them around and sent them back. You can actually see one Swedish Gripen was involved in the interception, along with two German Eurofighters of the Luftwaffe. Outside of that, we also got further developments from inside of the Russian Federation, including one that I have to laugh at a lot, because this is one that personally affects me to my soul. The Leningrad Military District is something that I've been trying and failing for days now to try and map out. I'm about to pull my hair out. It makes no sense. Primarily because, at least within this area of the Leningrad Military District near to St. Petersburg, there are two divisions, the 69th Guards Motor Rifle Division and then the 68th Guards Motor Rifle Division. What is driving me crazy about this, folks, is that the divisions are structured completely differently. So in NATO, you generally have this kind of a structure, and you'll see this in every single country. The Army commands a large amount of ground forces. Well, better yet, here's another example of it. The battalion is the basic fighting element. About 5 battalions come together and they make a brigade. And then about 3 to 5 brigades come together and then they make a division. And then those divisions are commanded by an army. And usually you can have however many divisions you want, but usually you'll see that in a single army, there would be like, a couple of divisions, maybe 5 or 3 that are in a single army. So in Russia, they just do it however the hell they want. One of these divisions controls divisions. Well, not really divisions, more so brigades, or the Russian equivalent of brigades, which are the motor rifle regiments, which you can see right here in the 69th Guards Motor Rifle Division. The other one just commands battalions. Like, no regiments, just battalions. So this motor rifle division is practically a regimental level command that's like a super regiment because it runs 15 battalions under its direct command. So as far as it's going, like with representing these on the map, this division actually has regiments. So this division commander commands its regiments, and then those regiments give orders to the battalions that are under their command. This one, on the other hand, the division commanders are micromanaging every single battalion under their command, and there's no regimental commanders to them. And then on top of that, what's even more confusing is that apparently none of the regiments in the 69th Guards Motor Rifle Division have a permanent base. They just kind of travel around like nomads, apparently, from base to base, because there's no permanent basing listed for any of them, and they just, I don't know, they just are around somewhere. So it's impossible to even model them on the map and say where they are right now, because they're anywhere inside of the Leningrad Military District. So that's also the next problem with that. And it's driving me freaking crazy because I come from NATO, where I've been modeling that, and there's a clear, very organized command structure that exists. And then you move into Leningrad, and it's an absolute shit show, and it's not even followable. And then on top of that, this is a combined arms army, but the equivalent group that's in Kaliningrad is an army corps. And that makes no sense either, because this Army Corps commands more forces on the ground, technically, than this combined arms army. This whole thing's been driving me crazy. So I absolutely hate the Leningrad Military District, and I hate the commander of the Leningrad Military District, which is Alexander Lapin. But that's not anymore today. That little son of a bitch has been removed from command, and he is now going to be the head of the Tatarstan Rustam Minkanov, which means he's in charge of nothing right now, and this is more of a symbolic posting. So luckily, this idiot's gone. Well, not really luckily, because it's a good thing that it's this mismanaged that it's driving me crazy, because I can't really represent this on a map well, but this little bastard is gone. So they're going to be replacing him in the Leningrad Military District with someone else. But honestly, at least for my sanity, maybe thank God. But for as far as Russian competency, I don't know if it's going to be going up from here or going down from here. I really don't know, but I don't really think you can get any more disorganized than the Leningrad Military District currently is. It's as disorganized as it could be, and there's no way to really go down from here. There's only a way to go up. So we'll see what happens with that. But anyways, we're going to be moving out of that. I had to add that in as a personal note, because this has been driving me crazy for weeks now. And every time I get on this map, I just sit here and stare at this one division and go, how do I put this on a map? And I'm just sitting there trying to dig up as much information as I could. Oh, wait a minute, hold up. I actually forgot to mention, y'all, I did find one of these regiments, and it's actually down here. This is the 83rd Motorized Rifle Regiment, and it is in the Kharkiv Oblast in Ukraine. It is fighting there, and I was able to confirm that, but that is the only regiment that I can put on the map, because the rest of them are wandering around like hell. I don't even know. Let's see, the Corsairs of North Africa, the Gypsies, I don't know. They just wander around. I don't know where they are, what they're doing, but they're wandering around out there somewhere, and I can't put them on a map. So anyways, moving on from that, and on into the rest of our news that we have, we also heard in Moscow today that Assad was possibly poisoned. The former
Oh my
president.
God.
Yeah.
What did he get poisoned with? Do we know?
Apparently formaldehyde, because in this picture he looks like a Madame Tussauds wax figure.
Yeah, I was about to say, it looks like he's already a little bit under the weather right there. But yeah, has he just been hanging out the whole time? As I had heard rumors that he was going to go back to being an eye doctor, like maybe in Moscow. But I think he's just been hanging out in his apartment the whole time. So I guess someone finally showed up and tried to get him.
I think he's just been hanging I think he's just been hanging out, man. I don't think he's been up to anything. But apparently he did get poisoned, at least allegedly today, and we're going to be waiting to see if any further info comes out about whether or not he was poisoned. So, honestly, folks, the Russians did it to him. They just don't want to take care of him anymore, and he serves no purpose, so they probably poisoned him. I'll be honest with y'all.
Also, by the way, somebody put down there in the replies, it looks like a cup of tea, delicious Russian tea makes wonders. And he put a picture of some teapots down. Oh, look, it's Uncle Vladimir's polonium tea. Oh my God.
Oh my God.
Somebody really made polonium tea. Oh my God, that's crazy. That might not be too far from the truth, though. Actually, it might not be too far from the truth. So that's crazy. I wonder what kind of shape he's in now.
I don't even know. I have a feeling it's rough shape, because when you have a face like that, you're always in rough shape.
This is such a sound safe. I want to go back to treating the eyes. I got to make sure people can see right, because they got to be able to see my war crimes.
Man, honestly, man, this guy sits there and looks like he would say, "Duh." I was once the leader of Syria. Duh. Honestly, the guy.
That's
looks
crazy.
Like
this guy. The Assad family's had a really bad go at it, because this guy's brother right here, if y'all didn't know, actually got killed in an auto accident when he was driving like a fool down the mountains of Syria, or I think it was somewhere in Syria. He was driving down some steep decline, and he apparently careened right off the side of the road and just wrecked this BMW, and he got taken out in that crash. So it looks like Bashar's fate might be a Russian poisoning. That seems like his fate. So car accident, Russian poisoning, and we'll see what ends up with the rest of them, I guess.
I suppose. Also, a little side note, we also got to see a new Algerian Su-34 being tested over the Zhukovsky airfield. This really means nothing at all. It's just an Su-34, and we don't even know if it'll make it to Algeria, because the Russians actually might requisition it for their own air force here in most combat aircraft, because if they get that slow in real life at any point, rather than a 0.1% chance scenario that they're actually in a gun range dogfight, they're going to get blasted out of the sky going that slow. So anyways, moving on from that, we also were able to hear further on down near Krasnodar Krai, which is a wonderful place, that the Russians were crying, hence the name Krasnodar Krai. A little drone attack was happening down here. Oh, I'm to your man. And also, we got to see it again right here in another clip. Well, folks. That place is blown up a lot like our fundraiser, which is now at $2,174 raised. Holy moly, that's crazy. Hopefully we'll be able to get it on up there to the goal. Matthew, do you think we can?
I think we can smash that goal. I think it's going to get smashed.
I think we can. I'm trusting. I have faith. I have faith, folks. I have faith. Moving on into Crimea, we also were able to hear that the Ukrainians struck Foros. There's a little picture of it. Look at it, all smoky and stuff. And apparently they hit a sanatorium. A sanatorium is a place that is kept clean, hence the name sanatorium. It's sanitation. But all jokes aside, sanatoriums can either be, here in America, some sort of a retreat or a mental asylum. And as far as it goes in Russia, this would be classified as a mental asylum because apparently it was being used by a Russian command staff. So clearly it's mental. But they did hit it with a missile, and we can see the smoke coming off of it right there. Actually, the Ukrainians hit it with a drone or a missile. We're not really sure which, but we can see the smoke coming off of it, and oh by golly, that's the building, and it's gone. And also you can see here one of the advertisements that came from the sanatorium called Foros Hall. I wonder if we can take a look at that here on... Oh, look, you can. Let's take a look at the pictures.
That looks like a hotel. That doesn't look like a sanatorium. It looks like some type of resort.
Yeah, sanatoriums are kind of like a mixed bag, at least in the old Soviet Union. The old Soviet Union. Sanatoriums were more so like a place of relaxation, a resort more so. Here in America, sanatoriums took on the real definition of pretty much being an insane asylum of a sort, mental rehab and stuff. But in former Soviet republics, sanatoriums are like resorts. And that's why the Russians picked this place to command out of, because it was pretty damn nice. But I don't think it's that nice any longer. But anyways, I gotta say, the Ukrainians really took one out there. Moving on out of that, however, and on into some other developments within the area of Crimea, you're gonna have a hard time making it to the Foros resort, even if you wanted to go there, now with it being ash and ruin, because everywhere in Crimea, they're out of gas. Apparently they're playing some copyrighted music.
I thought I was having a stroke there for a minute. I was like, oh, well, there's the big one. It hit.
Man, I was thinking, I don't know what that is, but I feel a little odd about it. I was like, it sounds like a song, and it was.
Man, I'll tell you what, these Russians and no gas, they can cry me a river. I tell you what.
Man, if only Crimea had a river in it.
Cry me a river.
Damn! 1,000 rubles. Holy moly, that's $100 US.
Really?
Yeah.
Damn, that's a lot.
That is a whole lot. Oh, wait, hang on, hold up. Am I getting that right, folks? Am I getting that right? Let me think. I'm bad at math. I'm just going to give up on that. Y'all figure out the math. Y'all figure out the math on that. I'm not going to even disgrace myself with making myself look stupid because I'm not proficient in math. Also, by the way, the Russian invasion scares are coming up around the Moldovan election right now, and everyone's like, oh my god, they're going to invade. I would have to agree with Geo Insider here. That's highly unlikely, most likely not going to happen. They're not even supplied, so how well would an invasion go, considering that they have a 1-to-1 attacker's advantage? And that doesn't even give them the superiority in numbers, much less they don't even have any supplies to operate with. So that ain't happening. But right now, the Russians are trying to make the Moldovans scared of that in the midst of the election. Anyways, moving on to the Ukrainian front lines, we also get to see some sort of a new ordnance that went off today in Nizhyn in the Chernihiv Oblast. I'm deeming it the firecracker because it had about the explosive mass of a firecracker, but we don't really know how deadly these things are. Apparently it is some sort of an explosive that the Russians are starting to use, but we don't really know much about it. But here's the only clip that we have of this new ordnance. A little weird with that.
And they were trying to hit the civilians with it?
I'm guessing that they were, but it was really deep inside of Ukraine. We really have no clue what dropped that, because we didn't see a drone hit in that area. It was just some sort of an explosive that kind of like landed and hit. And so we're just calling it the firecracker for now until we find out more information about it. Moving on from that, though, and on towards Sumy, we did get some combat footage of what the fighting is looking like as a part of the 2nd Detachment of the 4th Regiment of the Special Operations Forces Ranger in the Sumy direction. This looks fun.
That is some good fun right there. The unfun part though is when you try to dodge the drones coming in. That kind of sucks, but the driving part's nice.
We see them getting in a bunker, watching the drone operators. A lot of cuts in this clip. They're now flying the drones and hitting Russians with them.
Man, they had the editor was spazzing on this one. I mean, this is a lot of cuts.
Man, the editor said 100 cuts. A video by 1,000 cuts.
Visual death by 1,000 cuts.
Man, epileptic seizures by 1,000 cuts.
That guy just got flagged. He's getting flagged again. Look at him. The cameraman's backing up. He said, hey, Ivan, turn that away from me now.
He said, hey, bro, like, chill. Man, rah! Oh, that's pretty cool outro, actually. Man, like, that wolf went, rah! And I was like, wow, that's actually really cool animation.
Is that like a copy of, like, our Ranger patch for the Army?
Is it?
It kind of looks like almost a replica, or at least the top part of it.
Let's see. I think that might be a copy of, like, the Ranger School emblem. Let me go pull that up. Let's see. I mean, kind of. You know, it's kind of a copy of that. A little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Not really. Yeah,
Not
I'll take
really,
it
yeah.
back.
But, you know, interesting thing. Oh, follow me. Like, bro, honestly, I like that, though. Like, if you ever were lost on the field, go up to a ranger and ask them, hey, do I follow you? And then you look at the patch and go, that just answered my question. Thank you. But anyways, moving on from that and on out of that clip, we also get to see further on down in our location unknowns. So one of the special equipments that was destroyed today, this thing is an engineering vehicle. And it was blown up today by the Ukrainians. It's a fairly rare vehicle, actually. It's called the Terminator on Tracks. And they call it that because I can promise you that industrial machinery, much like for the Chinese, is the Russians' biggest enemy. The Russians just can't help but get injured around industrial machinery like this thing. And so for that reason, that was called the Terminator on Tracks. But this is the third visually confirmed destruction of such a vehicle in 3.5 years, which is quite rare. And also I got to give credit to Miss Disa for sharing that with me, which also Miss Disa shared with us the casualty report for the day, because the Kyiv Independent didn't post it, but we can always count on Miss Disa to post the casualty report. And that was the one Bobcat skid steer that was lost today. Hey!
They got one Bobcat. Look at that. They skid steered right into victory. Look at that, Jack. I mean, come on, man. Give them a discount. Give them a Bobcat. I mean, come on, man. You know, manual labor, dig ditches, and, you know, that's what they do in America, you know? Come on.
Look, I've got a great rap song for this Bobcat. Digging ditches, I'm getting blown up by bitches. But beyond that, Miss DC, keeper of the record, that was so bad. We need to cut that from the stream. But beyond that, Miss DC, keeper of the record, stated, according to the record keeping, that 553 drones is the highest daily loss, far exceeding the 461 on the 8th of September of 2025. UAV losses for September to date total 6,536 and exceed all of August as Russia continues massive swarm attacks. Personnel loss over 1,000 against 7-day average rises to 1,000. And it's the Enforcer, another Bobcat, and it was a great day. And we're going to get through the numbers really quickly. On the 21st night of September, do you remember the 21st night of September? Well, 1,010 Russians aren't, and 1 APC isn't either, along with 77 supply trucks, 1 main battle tank, 25 artillery pieces, 553 drones, 29 cruise missiles, and 1 Bobcat skid steer. And do you all remember the 21st night of September? You sure as hell do, because you were watching this channel. Ah! Man, give me a high five, the way we're cracking these shitty jokes. But moving on from that, now the location unknowns, it is time for us to get to the front. Because the front has been fronting today, or at least the Russians have been, because the Russians are pretending like everything's fine. The Ukrainians are showing that that certainly isn't the case by landing some drones inside of their outposts in the Sigma male unit.
Are you a Sigma male? What color is your Bugatti? Do you have a color of a Bugatti you prefer? Oh dear. Oh dear.
Oh man. What is this? Oh, it's another outpost. Oh, this one's got like nice timbering right here. Great carpentry. Well, doesn't matter now. There they go.
Oh wow, that one went deep into that outpost too. Shivered me timbers.
How did that have to correlate with pirates? How did that correlate?
It doesn't have to correlate. That's the beauty of it.
Well, I gotta tell you, man. Like the song 21st Night of September, the Ukrainians are giving them that earth, wind, and fire. I'll tell you that. Moving on down towards the area of Luhansk, we just generally got to see today a little ammunition strike on the Russians. It was lighting up the night sky. Старо пизда, Рус пизда.
Охуеть.
Охуеть.
It just sounds like a hell out there.
Man, tough times back there. And someone said, please don't sing ever again. I've got to, because we have to have embarrassing clips from my presidential run in 2040 that they can whip back out in the media and go, look at this guy, he's a goober. And then I'll go, well, at least I didn't play a piano with my wiener. and then I'll get a whole bunch of smoke. But anyway, so that we are going on down to the Konstantinivka area, where we also got to see the Russian mechanized assaults in this area being stopped dead in their tracks. By FPVs, of course. 80% of all casualties and fatalities in the war are caused by FPV drones. Y'all should know that at this point, we get practically no firefight footage. It's all footage of these vehicles getting obliterated by some kind of an FPV of a sort. Now that tank is running circles, like a hamster that's lost its mind. You know, these free speech bots, folks, I think they're like the Just Stop Oil people. They're funded by oil companies to make protests against oil look bad. And I think this free speech thing, like these bots are probably propagated by groups that are not for free speech, like China and Russia, and they're going around and spamming the internet at this point.
Man, those Just Stop Oil people, they could be going around defacing those paintings or whatever, throwing that, like, soup on the paintings. Like, this is going to stop the oil if we just deface this famous painting right here. It's like, actually, like, I thought, like, it was not good to do something illegal to stop something that they're calling illegal. It's like, isn't that kind of like defeating the point?
Honestly. Also, someone said, who's voting for this goober? Well, I'm not from Georgia, so I'm not a goober, so you can change that shit right now. I'm a redneck, or at least a civilized redneck, so change that. Like,
It's actually perfectly acceptable to say who's voting for this goober, because if you're running for governor, it's a gubernatorial election, so technically you're voting for the goober.
And I'm the biggest goober, so I'm gonna... Oh, we just hit the goal! Hey!
Come
Let's
on,
go,
Jack!
baby!
Whoa! I think it was Hal Rose throwing a 333 right there. It was anonymous though, but I think it was Hal. Now, damn, we've gone over by $98 right there. The goal has been smashed. Igor!
Yeah, baby! That's what I'm talking about! That's what it's all about! Woo! Breaking news! Breaking news! We just hit the goal! Like, hey! But beyond that, a massive shout out to all of y'all for supporting this fundraiser, and also Hal Rose, who threw in that 333 as an anonymous donation, because y'all have gotten us over the goal tonight. I gotta say, it's an excellent thing to see. It's wonderful to know that we hit another fundraiser goal. It's like the 150th or 60th. Oh, man.
I tell you.
Man, this guy sounds like he's
Also,
about
we're
to
having
go.
lag, by the way. The stream is dead.
Really?
Yes.
No, on my mama. We getting 2,800 kilobytes per second. We're good. We're good. Hopefully. People are saying that there's a lag attack going on. Maybe we ought to make sure that we're hearing people. Folks, can y'all hear this? That's Russian, by the way, for my ammunition depot just got blown up, and I'm terribly perplexed as to how that could have happened, because I thought our drone defenses were adequate. But still, it's back. People are saying that it's back. So let's watch the clip now that everyone is back. We so back. Sheesh!
Wow, that's a big fire.
What?
Whoa,
This isn't Syria. What the hell?
Whoa. What the hell was that?
Bro,
You see that thing in the sky?
This guy is speaking minion, bro. He saw a pigeon flower. He went, ese for boca. Like, bro, it's like, what the hell is he saying?
I think it's on YouTube's end. Honestly, it looks like we're doing pretty decent on our end.
Oh, shoot. Yeah, I actually saw it that time in OBS. And we're back, folks. We're back. I don't know what's going on, folks, but something real suspicious, something very fishy is going on. Very fishy. But moving on to the Berkrovsk front, we also got to see the Russian forces getting hit down here by the 68th Jaegers.
Oh, look, it's the free speech bot showing up again.
Legalize comedy. Legalize comedy. No.
Nothing like those Russian psyops in the chat again. Am I right?
Man, they're going to get people so annoyed with the bots. That's the plan. They're getting people so annoyed with the bots that people will just start saying F free speech because they're getting so annoyed by these people, or more so these machines.
Yeah, these mechanical beasties.
Are you turning into Scotty? These mechanical beasties. Like, man.
Captain, the mechanical beasties, they can't take no more.
Come on, Scotty, push him, like, aggravate him or something. But we also saw here in this clip from the Contra Omnis dissident that they are also hitting some Russian tanks inside the trees. Here we can see them hitting the tanks inside of the trees and blowing them sky high. Sean Haggard said, "The trolls are out of control." Like, honestly, they kind of are. Like, there's a new waves of bots. We've gone through so many different eras of bots at this point. It's insane.
Stupid bots, too. Like, they're not even that smart.
Honestly, for them to be robots, they don't have a lot of sense.
Damn it, I'm a doctor, Jim. I'm not a bot troller.
Damn it, Jim, I'm a trawler, not a real talker. Like, something. Just come up with something ridiculous.
Then Dr. McCoy casually says something racist towards Spock. Oh, Lord have mercy. Honestly, that was some crazy stuff they were saying on that show. I mean, it was wild. Like, I know it was just like obviously it was a joke for the show, but I'm like, good Lord. These days, people would be like, hey, whoa, what you talking about?
Man, I like the one, though, where they took Spock's brain, and they're like, he doesn't have a brain. And I like how no one just said, well, shit, half the people on this show don't have a brain. You see, in the red shirts, they die in all kinds of stupid ways, like hamsters. I mean, they all must be missing their brains or something. And, like, they don't have nothing up there. But moving on out of that and down towards Procross, this is a very Star Trek-esque joke. We also saw near Kherson that the Ukrainians were blowing up the Russian boats as a part of the 426 separate battalion of the 36th. But there's Buhanka. Oh, it's gone.
Damn.
And there's another
just
one.
like that.
Gone in a flash. Just like the TV show that got canceled. But you can also see this Ural 4320 getting blown up. Looking like a double wide surprise. Sticking that rear end out. But we can also see that boat there traveling down the Dnipro. It's about to get it. By this drone. Oh, hit right on the bow. I tell you, just like the Titanic. Anyways, we also get to see this one hitting a little communications post that they set up on an electrical tower, and we can also see here a little Russian position, or an enemy position as they call it on the text there, getting hit as well. I gotta tell you, folks, they just can't stop it. The Ukrainians just can't stop winning. Oh, by the way, near Dnipro, they were continuing to shoot down drones in broad daylight today. Take a look at this.
Прямо над нами. О, я заставил это.
Man, this is like a spectator that was reported at this point in Dnipro.
It's like, yeah, honestly, it really is.
Also, someone's playing that trap beat. Someone's playing that trap beat, that mumble rapper out there. They're going, oh, yeah. Like this, bro. It's like someone just listening to their beats in the midst of an air defense. Interesting. But moving on out of Dnipro, folks, it's finally time for us 2 hours and 2 minutes into this news segment to make it to Kyiv and cover the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky from today. They actually put it on the website. Thank the Lord. So without further ado, here's the news. Or more so, the speech. Peach!
Бажаю здоров'я, шановні українці. Готуємося зараз до дуже напруженого тижня, тижня дипломатії. Багато можемо зробити, якщо партнери будуть чути нас і підтримувати пропозиції, які реально наближають закінчення війни. Буде тиждень Генеральної асамблеї ООН, різні заходи, різні зустрічі. Вже у графіку майже 20 зустрічей з лідерами різних країн. З усіх частин світу, з усіма, хто давно підтримує Україну і хто серед нових наших партнерів. Перші зустрічі вже завтра. Ми плануємо також на тижні зустріч з президентом Сполучених Штатів Америки. Буде вагома подія щодо повернення українських дітей, які були викрадені Росією. Саміт дійсно глобальний щодо цього. Важливо, щоб тиждень додав світові налаштованості на сильні дії, без сили мир не пануватиме. Євросоюз вже загалом узгодив 19-й пакет санкцій проти Росії і розраховуємо на оперативне затвердження. Цими тижнями були санкції інших країн від Японії, Австралії до Британії. Тиск на російський нафтовий флот, на російську торгівлю енергоресурсами. Тиск на всі російські схеми обходу санкцій, в тому числі через криптовалюту. Дякую Європі за цей тиск. Впевнений, має бути хід Сполучених Штатів. Путін має вірити, що Сполученим Штатам не все одно і що сильні кроки будуть. Хочу подякувати і Америці, і всім нашим партнерам за те, що працює програма Pearl. Нова наша програма, яка дозволяє нам купувати американську зброю за кошти партнерів по НАТО. Це ракети для Петріотів, для Хаймарсів і інша зброя. Все дуже ефективне. У жовтні розраховуємо ще додатково наповнити цю програму. Маємо також перші пропозиції партнерам щодо експорту української зброї сучасної. Це буде контрольований експорт нашої зброї, зокрема морських дронів. Безпека морських шляхів – це невід'ємна складова загальної безпеки, і від багатьох націй це залежить. Україна пропонує всім своїм надійним партнерам наші розробки, які допомогли нам самим у Чорному морі. Ми розраховуємо на сильні контракти, ми готуємо і нові довгострокові кроки для фінансової стійкості України, і це стосується передусім російських активів. Треба, щоб російські активи більше працювали на захист від російської агресії та на відновлення нашої країни. Будемо і щодо цього говорити з нашими партнерами. Сьогодні вже було кілька доповідей головкома Сирського. Це прикордоння, фронт, контрнаступальна наша операція в районі Добропілля та Покровська. Я хочу подякувати всім нашим воїнам. Хочу подякувати кожному нашому підрозділу за результати та дійсно сильний захист нашої держави, нашої незалежності. Наступний тиждень має зробити ще сильніше і наші дипломатичні позиції, і нашу армію. Обов'язково. Слава Україні!
Героям слава. And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine here on day 1306 of our global news coverage. And it's time for us to move on to the second segment of the stream, where we get to talk to all of y'all. And we get to talk about anything and everything that y'all want to talk about. Literally anything and everything. You know, the sky's the limit, except for religion, politics, climate change, and also whether the A-10 is relevant in combat or not. All those things are off the table. But one thing that certainly is on the table is everything else. And we'll be making sure to get into all that and more in this question segment. I do have to thank you all, though, greatly for watching tonight. We had a peak viewership tonight of 13.8 thousand people and an overall viewership so far in just the first 2 hours of 85,000 people. That's quite a lot of people, and that's quite a lot of folks who've enjoyed the channel tonight. I hope that y'all do hit the like button and also subscribe. We are, of course, getting very close at this point to 500,000 subscribers. That is 500,000. If you were to take 1 million and cut it in two, you would have 500,000. 500,000 is a lot more than 3 people. As a matter of fact, 500,000 is so big that it's very hard to count on 2 hands. All those facts are true, but sound really stupid. But beyond that, I thank you all so much for watching so far. I hope you all do subscribe. We're getting really close to 500,000 subs. And of course, we're going to be taking it away at this point, calling off all of the top donors we have so far, and then getting into all of the questions that we have. But before we even get into all of that, we have one last thing to do. Officials warn that NATO isn't taking Russian threats seriously. Is willful ignorance or incompetence? And Matthew, what are people thinking about that? And what are you thinking about that as well?
All right, so what do y'all think about this issue right here? And it looks like 41% said it's willful ignorance by NATO officials, and 29% said NATO takes it seriously, and 22% said it's pure incompetence. And honestly, I would say this. The only people I'm saying the Russian threat is not serious are just a handful of clueless people. I'll just put it kindly like that. You'd have to be clueless as hell not to think that Russia poses a massive threat to NATO. And I know typically I don't get that, I guess, offensive with my statements when it comes to opinions. But on that one's so obvious that it's almost offensive that people say that Russia is not a threat because they're literally attacking NATO allies. So how can they not be a threat? So I would say NATO takes it seriously. seriously as a whole, but there's a handful of clowns that want to say it's not a threat, which is honestly crazy to say that. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say that it is a fairly significant portion of the fact that a lot of people are willfully ignorant. So I'd have to be with 41% as well, really. People who say that Russia isn't a threat are putting their heads in the sand, or they're not paying attention, or they're living in denial. And it's denial that could end up killing folks because people don't want to look and face the facts. I'm a very pragmatic kind of a person. If something isn't working, it's not working. If something is dangerous, it's dangerous, even if you like it. You know, like if you sit there and you like a cigarette. Well, you might like a cigarette, but most people who smoke have at least a gumption about them to say that it's going to kill them one day. And that's facing the facts, and that's the truth of it. And while we're all sitting here trying to act like the Russians aren't attacking us, and they're just flying drones into Poland and flying through Estonia airspace like it doesn't exist, and pretty much doing whatever they want towards NATO at this point, and are also saying that they are in a de facto state of war with us, and then we just want to act like that isn't the case, or at least not respond to any of it, we should at least have the mindset, or at least the gumption about it, to say that they pretty much are at war with us and that they are a significant threat to NATO. I feel like that would just be a logical step from this point, and anyone who isn't saying that would be having a very challenged time with their mental faculties and the ability to reason and ration properly, at least the most political way I can put that kind of a statement without getting too aggressive with it. But it is time for us to get on into all of those top donors. And Matthew, who are the top donors that we've had in between that last segment and this one?
All right, so we're currently sitting at $2,696
Oh,
raised of the
Oh my
$2,500 goal. Fantastic to see that, by the way, and a huge shout out to everybody once again for helping us to hit that fantastic number right there. And also to call for our top donors right here. And we're going to not do that again, because honestly, that sounds horrible. But jumping into our top donors right here, since the last time we called them off, this one goes to Espen Turgenhagen, who puts in a $100 donation to the fundraiser. And a huge shout out to Espen for that support of the fundraiser. Also, a huge shout out to Wealthy Demon. Hopefully, we convert you to a Wealthy Angel soon. But he puts in a 50 to the fundraiser. And also, we had a 50 from Skip Tracer 007, as well as a 50 from Samuel Sezamanski, and a 50 from Greg Carrier. And a huge shout out to all 5 of y'all for throwing in that support of the fundraiser and helping us to reach that number that we're at right now. But Enforcer, what say you?
And also, real quick question, Matthew. Was Wealthy Demons a donation or a super chat?
Both.
Really?
Both, yeah.
Well, shoot. A big shout out to y'all. I just wanted to make sure because I saw a super chat and I was like, wait, did we just count that as a donation? But let's see here, the Wealthy Demon is throwing in support to the channel and the fundraiser at the same time. Call that a double whammy. Like a double Whopper with cheese. But I gotta say, a big congratulations to all of y'all once again for supporting this fundraiser tonight and getting it to this fundraiser goal. It's absolutely amazing and impressive to see so many people supporting these fundraisers still years later, and helping out the folks around the world that we're actually covering the news on. When people sit there and ask what we do here on this channel and what our job entails, one of our big points of pride is that this channel has raised about $1.7 million for nonprofits over about its 3.5 years of operation, at least covering the news, although the channel has technically been around for 4 years. So that's a huge thing that Enforcer Matt and me are incredibly proud of. I know that a lot of y'all are incredibly proud of being a part of that, and I know that all the folks tonight have a direct laid claim that y'all are a part of the excellence that the Lee Spring Army continues to possess each and every day, and the kind of support that our community gives in Western American interests around the world that is inherently within this nation's best interests at heart. So a huge congratulations to all of y'all once again. And of course, we are going to be moving on into them super chat. We actually have some because YouTube still hasn't fixed that. You know, I'll be honest with y'all folks, I think YouTube doesn't want to fix that, because it's been around for a minute now. I feel like it's been around for a couple of months, but we will be getting the super chats that we got tonight quickly, and then we'll be getting on into our live chats, because tonight is supposed to be for everyone to be able to live chat and have questions answered without having to throw in any money. This channel isn't a pay-to-play system. It is a thing that we have to, of course, make our money on, because we have to pay our bills, but at the same time we want to get to talk to each and every one of y'all. So what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so jumping into our 2 remaining super chats right here. This one is a super chat this time from that wealthy demon once again, who puts in a 100. And a huge thank you for that support, by the way, once again. And also, I was curious. I said, oh, what are you doing during the day? And he said, I work in the hotel industry. And that makes sense. That makes sense. But thank you very much for that support. And he said, this is the first time I've caught the live stream and love all your work. And my question is, what do you think about the chances of Russia doing something dumb enough or becoming too confident to spark the powder keg in Europe despite EU and NATO warnings?
I would say that the chances are pretty decent at this point because they're really dumb enough, not confident enough, but they are dumb enough to do it. And we keep laying out the sort of groundwork for them to just keep pushing until they do something that we have to respond to, and they're dumb enough that they'll get to that point. So I'd say that right now the chances are pretty high, and that's what keeps us incredibly concerned on this channel day in and day out at this point, is that we aren't seeing any strong NATO response to what the Russians are doing. And as a matter of fact, everyone here, especially in the United States and the government right now, wants to just ignore the problem and act like that it isn't a problem. So I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. But a huge, massive thanks to you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, Wealthy Demon, and helping this thing to be possible. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this channel possible and keep it running. So a huge thanks to you so much once again. And we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Great Southwest Trains, who puts in a 5. And thank you very much, good sir, as well, for that support. He said, what would it really take for NATO to invoke Article 5 from Russia's actions this month? LSA. Honestly, the best chance for Article 5 to get invoked is a insult to the ego to any Western official, specifically specifically just a handful of them. But Enforcer, what say you?
Specifically one, but I'd have to, I have to second that and say that that's probably the only way that this would go anywhere is if Putin insults the president of the United States directly. And because there's really no way to, take a president of an enemy country off air, we have to take other more creative means. But beyond that, one thing I would have to say is a big thanks to you for the $5 super chat there. And I'd also have to say that you said Great Southwest Trains, the southwest of the United States, the southwestern part of the country, the part that has the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe cities within it, the one that has the southern area of the country, maybe even the southern part of the Pacific in it, or maybe even, something else entirely, like maybe the Union of this United States that reaches the Pacific shores, maybe the Union Pacific, or something along those lines. You are apparently a railroading fan by your name, Great Southwest Trains, and there's all kinds of cool companies that used to exist down here in the Great Southwest part of the country. Nowadays, it's just the BNSF and the Union Pacific. But one thing that is cool, and I'll have to say that this is one of my favorites, at least around this area that used to exist, is the Southern Pacific, which had some really cool paint jobs, in my opinion, like this one.
Indeed.
Yes, indeed. I'd say, old boy. Or the Santa Fe, which is probably one of the most, Santa Fe Railway, or railroad. Here we go. Yeah, these are famous. Everybody knows the Santa Fe. It's probably like the most famous train, or at least company, that ever existed on the railroads in America. I bet you more people know what this thing is than even modern railroads at this point. But I do thank you for the support, Great Southwest Trains, and I hope I was able to mention some of the massive companies of the U.S. Southwest that were once pioneers in the railroad industry and are now just a sub-name inside of a corporate merger somewhere, and the Union Pacific is possibly going to take another victim. That's right, folks. The railroad company that's been going around and completely deleting railroads off the map, just, absorbing them into the Union Pacific and keeping nothing of them around, is coming here to the southeast, pretty much the whole East Coast, because right now they're still involved in merger talks with Norfolk Southern, and if that goes through, the new company is going to be called, you guessed it, Union Pacific, and everything that was once a part of the Norfolk Southern is just going to be painted in that Union Pacific piss yellow. And it also will all be run just like the rest of Union Pacific. So if that happens, pretty much everything about the Norfolk Southern that makes it unique will disappear within about the next year or two after that merger completes. So a little bit sad on that. And I'll be honest, disconnects again. YouTube's having some server issues tonight. And it looks like we're back. I hope that Yeah, it does look like we're back. In my personal opinion, folks, I hope that that merger does not happen. I hope that I hope that that gets shot down and that we continue to see all of the great class ones that we have today. But anyways, moving on from that, we are going to move on into the next one.
All right, so moving on from that and moving on into our live chat questions proper, it's now time to grab our Morse code decoders of the stream. And we do see right here that we had Paul Schultz, Kevin J, Mason Miami, Joni Dog, Norm Pritchett, Arable Garbo, Her Royal Fluffiness, Kush, Kobe Oterix, and Sire. And it said the Elsa Morse code decipher says, you know it's a pretty tense time inside of Eastern Europe. I just hope it's the right thing that's done.
And ding, 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 ding. That's the sound of money. I just hit the jackpot. That was dead on the nail. That was the Morse code message of the night. And I hope that we do the right thing. I said do. I did it. I said it, folks. But beyond that, I hope that we do the right thing in Eastern Europe and that we wake up one day. I've been begging and hoping that we will, but nobody's listening. Nobody listens to this channel, like, in all honesty. Actually, a lot of people do. It's one of the biggest in the country. But weirdly enough, it seems like nobody really listens to our input on anything. Unlike others who can give input that really is sometimes based in nothing and then is listened to, which is kind of weird. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that somewhat well. And with that, we are on into the questions. What do we got?
All right, so jumping into our live chat questions, this one goes to Brooklyn, who said, what is the opinion on the Saudi-Pakistan alliance and what it means?
It's a defensive alliance based entirely against Iran. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan actually share a common enemy, at least in that situation, which is Iran, because everybody surrounding Iran hates Iran. The only country that is somewhat neutral to them is Turkmenistan, and that's because they're run by some nutty dictator, and that's a whole thing on its own. But beyond that, Iran funds and supports terrorist groups like the Houthis that attack the Saudis, and also Iran funds and supports the Balochistan independence movement within Balochistan, Pakistan, which is also against Pakistan, and also has conducted some small border skirmishes with Pakistan in the past, and also Iran continues to try and posture itself and threaten the Saudis directly. So the defensive alliance between the two isn't one that's directed against India, it's more so directed against a common threat that they have coming from Iran. So that's really what the defensive pact is based around, and it's also based around the fear that if Iran does get a nuclear weapon, Saudi Arabia wants to have some sort of a nuclear umbrella to protect themselves from an incredibly unstable, and dangerous country that is now nuclear armed, and the Pakistanis will provide that through their nuclear protection umbrella to Saudi Arabia. So that's generally what I've been able to ascertain from this defensive pact, and that's why for many people, it appears to be a very weird alliance between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, but it's directed against Iran, and that's the reason why. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that well, and we're on to the next one.
All right, so our next question here is going to go to none other than, looking through here, it goes to Aga, who said, did Russia test that missile yet this weekend? And no, they haven't tested any missiles yet. We're currently waiting to hear what's going to happen above the Kapustin Yar test site over the next few days. Of course, there is an airspace closure that's going to be happening there, so we're waiting to see what that's going to be about. But we haven't heard any tests of that nuclear cruise missile that was rumored to be tested during Zapad. We haven't heard anything about that. So it sounds like Russia's missile tests are being delayed for some reason. You can kind of take a guess why. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that the missile tests are also being delayed. That's why we haven't heard anything about it, and it's most likely due to technical issues. And when they finally try to test it, it'll probably just blow up, and then that'll be the end of the test because they'll lose the test vehicle. So I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Hachi Oda, who said, did we, the United States, just test an ICBM, or is it misinfo?
It appears that we did, from what we can collect at the moment, and it also appears that no TAMs were issued that would lead to us to believe that it was a Trident II ICBM test. So we'll most likely hear about that tomorrow in the morning. They'll most likely make that press release then for the U.S. public's concerns. But with that, I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one.
And we have a question from Taylor McLean, who said, what would happen if the military was ordered to fight against NATO?
That would most likely never happen, and if we were ordered to fight against NATO, the military follows the orders that it's given. So, for the large part, at least in theory, they would go to war with NATO. But, you know, that will most likely never happen, and I hope it wouldn't, because that would be absolutely stupid. But you never know in these kinds of times. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
Also, by the way, Alovi said, "What's the difference between SLBM and ICBM?" It's just the method of launch. It's submarine launched ballistic missile (SLBM) and ICBM's intercontinental ballistic missile. They generally have close to the same capabilities, but one's submarine launched and one's launched from land. So that's pretty much the only difference between the two. But jumping into our next question here, this one goes to Joe Guerrero, who said, "Do you think a modern day draft will include women?"
I would doubt it. If it's
Oh,
not,
really?
I actually would. I would doubt it because if it's not included currently, it most likely wouldn't be included in wartime. They most likely wouldn't change that then. They would just work on the manpower pool, in my opinion.
Interesting. What is the? Let's see. What is the law on that? Let's see. Would women be drafted in World War III? Let's see here. No, women are currently not drafted into the U.S. military because only men are required to register for selective service. So they'd have to pass legislation changing that to include women in the Selective Service Act. So it doesn't appear that women are currently going to get drafted in that, based on what I'm reading here.
I would also say that that's not really a big deal to me, at least in my opinion, because I don't really think it's, say, the greatest move to start conscripting everyone in the country in mass like that. It's probably just better to keep it with the men, because that's just historically been the way it's always been. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. I don't know if people would like to hear the reasons for that, but there's a load of reasons for it, and it's not really a good move. Like I'll go through a couple of them because whether people like them or not, this is kind of the truth. One, women can have kids. That's a really big one. So if you end up getting a whole bunch of women killed in war, I mean, men can help reproduce, but without a large population of women, there's really no way to reproduce and have a, at least hypothetically, decent fertility rate in a post-war situation. Secondly, men, at least as far as combat testing has gone, in between all women units versus all men units generally have a higher expected combat efficiency at any moment than women do. They also just due to the body mass or the body muscle index of men, they generally can carry a greater amount of weight and also generally are capable of more, at least in terms of physical strength. So generally, I mean, it's not a bad thing for it to be men only. I think that that's perfectly fine. I don't really think that's a bad thing. And I think really, to be honest, the only times we've ever seen anyone conscript women or force women into a draft would be the Soviet Union in World War II, which was just literally at the point that everyone had to be in the service to fight to the death for the country because it was soon to collapse if they didn't do that. And for countries like Israel, where it's such a small country with such a small population, everybody has to serve because if they rely on men only, they're cutting out half of the conscriptable population pool. So that's generally what I would say. That would be my 2 cents on it. And personally, I think that that's fine by me. Some people have a whole bunch of arguments about that. It's actually a fairly contentious topic usually, is that some people say that it should be everyone. Me personally, I don't really think so. I mean, if people want to make it into that, that's fine. But in the current system, as in how it exists right now, I don't really think that that's too big of a deal. But anyways,
It ought to be voluntary. It ought to be voluntary for women. I know some people don't find this opinion right here very. Some people are very much opposed to it, but I'm just going to be straight up honest. Women are capable of serving in the military, but I would prefer women not to have to get drafted into the military because going into a war is not something that's like, oh, we should all be equal here and go into war. Like going into war is very tough on everybody. It's very tough. It's a very bad environment. And honestly, if we can try to keep as many people as possible out of that, I would say all for it. I really don't understand a lot of women that would want to go to war. It's like, for example, I'm not sure if women are going to be raising their hands talking about, yeah, send me to the front lines. It's like, is that going to happen? I'm not sure if it would or not, but I think it ought to be voluntary for women. I'm a big believer in that. I don't think they should be drafted. Just from a personal perspective, they're capable, yes, but at the same time, though, why would they want to go to the front lines? It seems like something that's kind of a little bit strange to me.
I would say that, like Matthew, I think that women joining the military, especially in an emergency situation, should be on a volunteer basis only. Men being conscripted is fine by me. I think that women should volunteer, and I don't think that they should be held back from holding any combat positions. As long as they are able to meet the physical requirements through the physical fitness tests, then they should be able to hold any role, including that of frontline infantry, and also some of the most strenuous tasks out there like that. But at the same time, I don't really think it's a good idea to mass conscript regardless of sex. I don't really think that that would be a good idea. Well, for some countries, is what they have to do, like for Israel, because they have such a small population pool to pull from. And for the Soviet Union, it was a necessity during the Second World War because they had to have quite literally everyone fighting out there to try and stop the Nazis from reaching Moscow, St. Petersburg, and so on. But for most countries, that generally isn't something that is done. That's what I would say on my 2 cents. I'll just leave it at that. So with that, we are on to the next one.
Also, by the way, I don't know if you saw this or not, but one of our former professors from law school just came into the chat and literally said they were glad we bailed from the profession. It's terrible, and they're glad that
What?
we found a niche here that's doing well. They didn't say what name they were. I have a feeling, I think I know which one it might have been, but kind of interesting with that. They said
What
that
the?
our former law professors watched the channel as well. So honestly, I'm glad I bailed from it myself, and also I feel sorry for that professor that said that because apparently they don't enjoy it. And I have a feeling I know which one it was, but they don't enjoy it either. I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure who or how many lawyers out there actually enjoy what they do anymore. It's kind of a rough profession, and it really wears on your mind. Like it's very stressful. It's kind of gotten nasty these days too when it comes to that. So yeah, it's kind of interesting.
I gotta say, I thank you for the encouraging words. I hate to hear that you don't like the profession either, though, considering that you're in it. That's unfortunate. I always hope that whenever people go into a profession, they enjoy it. Like I'll say, my experience in law school, and I think Matthew can agree with me, I absolutely hated it with a passion, to be entirely honest. Like after I got into it, I was like, I just absolutely loathe this. I hate it. This is not what I want to do. But some folks find that great. Some folks find working in sanitation, like with sewage, to be incredibly rewarding. Others wouldn't. And some people will absolutely hate that job, while others will thrive in it. And everyone has to have their role in society and do their part. It's just that some people have a huge aversion to doing it. But beyond that, that's very unfortunate to hear that you would say that it's rough, because I know that it is rough, and I've heard a lot of people say that you don't get respect from your clients, you don't get respect from anyone, and the hours are grueling, and it's just extremely tough to even make it. It's an interesting thing with that. But I do thank you for the encouraging words. That's very interesting here, and I thank you so much for enjoying the show and watching. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next live chat question is going to go to Darter, who said, have you guys heard of the rail strikes that Ukraine recently pulled off?
Yes, we actually have been talking about those, and they've been having a significant impact, from what we can tell, on Russian logistical capacities, at least in the southern military district. We've been seeing that, at least in some instances, entire main lines have been knocked out for days on end, even one time for about a week long before they were able to restore operational capacity on the whole line. So we have been talking about them. It's just they haven't been happening a lot over this week, but they still are having a pretty significant impact across the whole board. So with that, I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next question here is going to go to Michael, who said, what is the possibility of Russia following China's lead and standing with Venezuela?
I have a feeling that Russia will follow China's lead in that sense, because generally any country that's non-American will align with other countries that are against American interests. So Russia aligning with Venezuela and offering some sort of public word of support is highly likely, but any Russian support to Venezuela will also be non-existent as well, due to the logistical supply line links and also the slow turnaround for that reason. So I hope that does address that the best that we can, at least in my opinion. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And this one is going to go to Diane Merriam, who said, what's going on with Pakistan and India, and are they still shooting at each other?
From what we know today, they may be. We haven't gotten any updates on that over 24 hours. But considering that, how we work the news here on this channel is that we haven't gotten any updates to show that something has progressed or stopped. We just go off of what was last reported. So from what we can say, off of 36 hours ago, firefights are still most likely going on along the line of contact in Jammu and Kashmir. But we cannot say that with 100% certainty because we don't have a 24-hour-old update or less than 24-hour-old update. But off of 36 hours ago, firefights were ongoing. And considering that we haven't gotten any change to that news, we are still assuming that they are ongoing intermittently at this point in the area. So the answer to that would be yes. From what we would know, the firefights would still be going on right now. So with that, I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to OK State, who said y'all spoke yesterday about that new 50 cal Gatling gun system mounted on a pickup that Poland just posted about. Do we know if it's in use or being mass produced yet?
I would have to say we don't know. It looks to be a new reveal of a trailer-based defense system, but we don't really know if it's being mass-produced yet. I have a feeling that it's most likely going to be soon to be produced in mass, but at the moment I think that it's only prototypical, and that was a display of the prototype, more so than a mass production series variant of the system. So I hope that does address that well, and with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Darter once again. They said, have we talked about the growing theory that Russian nuclear weapons don't work due to how expensive tritium is?
We've actually talked about that in the past, that just due to the lack of the Russian military's budget, most of them are probably derelict and not in operational capacity. So we've actually touched on that before, and we actually do believe that a significant portion of Russia's nuclear arsenal, possibly even 50% or greater, is not even operational and only exists on paper. But the problem is that even if you slash the Russian nuclear arsenal in half, they still have about 3.3 thousand usable nuclear weapons, which still puts them at, pretty handily, the number 2 most nuclear armed nation on the planet. China has, I think, the 3rd largest nuclear arsenal, and they have about 900 nuclear warheads, all included. Most of those are strategic, actually. China has very little tactical nuclear weapons. Russia still, at that point, would have about 3.3 thousand usable nuclear weapons, and America would have about 6.7 thousand to 6.8 thousand usable nuclear warheads. So even if half of them didn't work, they still would have one of the most sizable nuclear arsenals on the planet. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the third to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Mad Machine, who said, will Russia be able to keep essential services and infrastructures going, or will the fuel shortages get severe enough for the government to completely collapse?
I have
But it's nothing crazy outside.
It might be the weather. It might also be a YouTube stream issue, like a server issue of a sort, because this very rarely happens. And from what I know, everything on this computer, and it is correct, everything on this computer has been updated. I updated it this morning, so I don't know why this is going on. But beyond that, I would have to say, I hope. Also, man, can you reread that last question just so that way I can make sure to get back on track there?
Yeah. Let's see. It was Mad Machine's question. He said, will Russia be able to keep essential services and infrastructures going, or will the fuel shortages get severe enough for the government to completely collapse?
I would have a feeling that the government will collapse, but not because of the direct lack of fuel stopping them from conducting any government activities. It will be because the economy will collapse under the government, and due to them no longer having a functioning economy or a sizable enough tax base to be able to fund government operations, that will stop all government operations, and then that will lead to civil unrest. And considering that the government will have practically lost most, if not all, of its power because it's not able to pay anyone to do their job, then it will collapse. So that's what I'm thinking about. Pretty much, in a sense, the gas shortages will eventually lead to a Russian governmental collapse if unimpeded. So I hope that addresses that the best I can, and we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who was like the last person to throw in the lucky last question of the night?
And this one goes to Philip Southern, who said, any chance that boots on the ground in Venezuela is to give our guys some live fire experience so that they would arrive in Europe ready to go? Honestly, Philip, that would not be a good idea because Venezuela's environment is completely different than the environment that they'd be fighting in the Baltic states, or at least in my personal opinion. There's some similarities, but not a whole lot. And also, I would say the idea of expending resources in Venezuela and also tying them up in a completely different region of the world, that's not a good thing to do at this point in time in the world geopolitical sphere either. So I don't think that's the case. If that's their idea, then that's a not a great idea. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say it's highly unlikely. Like Matthew was saying, the environment inside of Venezuela is entirely different. It's incredibly hot. It's very humid. It's jungle-like. And that's compared to the battlefields of Eastern Europe, where you would see larger rolling plains, more moderate temperatures, and lower humidity prevailing over a larger area. On top of that, the Baltics and also Eastern Europe as a whole generally are conducive to armored warfare and generally larger armored operations, while Venezuela would most likely not be conducive to that, even in wider open areas, as the mountainous terrain and also the jungle-like environments would generally be conducive more so to infantry-based activity or airborne-based activity using air assault units based out of, say, an air cav unit to be able to conduct operations within that area. So operationally, conducting anything in Venezuela would be totally different than what you would see in the Baltics or Eastern Europe, and for that reason, I don't really think it's for gaining experience. I think that it would be more so because of an attempt to curb Chinese influence or contain Chinese influence in South and Central America. But with that, I hope that does address it the best I can, and we've actually reached the end of tonight's stream. Yippee! That was a terrible voice crack right there. Yippee! There we go. And I gotta say, what a stream tonight, folks. Over 2.5 hours, we had a peak viewership of 13.8 thousand people, and 93,000 people have watched the stream before it ended. I've gotta say that we are entirely honored and greatly appreciative to all of y'all for enjoying the stream tonight and also helping that fundraiser to reach a whopping $2,712 raised. I've got to thank you all so much once again for watching the stream tonight and also helping out that fundraiser. If y'all have enjoyed a lot and you're new to the channel, please make sure to subscribe. We are growing day by day and getting even closer to 500,000. Hopefully, we'll be able to hit that incredibly soon. And so with that, we will see you all on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 48 hours, actually, of news from around the world. And if there is enough news to cover in the midday tomorrow, I will be the one personally making the short war summary for all of y'all to hear from. And hopefully there will be enough news for me to make one. And so with that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, Ram Slava, long live the Republic, and long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die.
And good night to you all. And like the Enforcer said, a huge shout out to everybody once again for helping us to smash that fundraising goal and get up to $2,700 raised of the $2,500 goal. A huge shout out to everybody once again for making that possible. And a huge shout out to the 93,000 people that joined us by the end of the stream. And we appreciate every single one of you once again for joining us here on the stream. But with that, we'll see you all on Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Eastern. And the Enforcer will see you all midday tomorrow for a short war video. And with that, Slava Ukraine, here on the Slava. Get some rest and good night.